And we are ready to get started. Our live stream lecture, you, the fans, voted here on YouTube, as you do every weekend, for which topic we will be discussing. And you guys wanted to talk about Andrew Jackson, the the seventh president of the United States, probably one of the more controversial and well-known figures in all of American history. And Andrew Jackson is joining me from behind, right there, the seventh president of the United States, the guy on the $20 bill. You see him probably more than any other U.S. president, except, depending on the type of money you carry in your wallet. You probably see Abraham Lincoln and George Washington a little bit more, but Andrew Jackson is one of the most prolific and most often seen U.S. presidents in all of U.S. history, and that is because Andrew Jackson is indeed on the $20 bill, despite recent efforts to get him replaced by Harriet Tubman. He's there. I don't know if he's there to stay necessarily, but of course, Andrew Jackson is one of the most well-known American presidents, and I will be discussing in the live stream lecture portion of today's live stream what makes Andrew Jackson such an impactful and important president in U.S. history. Why is he so well-known, and what is his legacy? It has taken me a long time as a historian, and I've been studying this man for 20 years, and I'm not that old, so close to 25 actually. It has been very difficult for me to ascertain a proper understanding and interpretation of the legacy of Andrew Jackson, and getting ready for this live stream lecture brought that up for me as well. However, if you follow us on TikTok, you can check out the video that I did there where I actually do discuss Jackson's legacy, and I'm going to give a more expanded version of my interpretation of Jackson's legacy, where I actually think that Andrew Jackson was a good president for his time, but is not a good president in retrospect. I think it's a relatively complex way of looking at the seventh president of the United States, but when I talk about Old Hickory, there is a lot to cover and there's a lot to go on. This guy has an incredible resume, one of the longest of any U.S. president. He's one of the most complex characters, one of those larger-than-life figures that's going to change history. And while a lot of people who are larger-than-life change history, and you can see it, you immediately say positive, i.e. George Washington, or you say negative, i.e. a certain Austrian painter. Andrew Jackson's change on history is still just as dynamic in many ways as a Lincoln or a Stalin, but it's far more complex in the good and the bad. Characters like Stalin have moments of grandeur and great accomplishment, and characters like Lincoln have great faults and failings, but they are on the net evil and good respectively. Whereas a character like Andrew Jackson is just as impactful, or almost as impactful as those guys, but is more controversial because he is so complex. He's a larger-than-life figure. It's hard to talk about American history without him, and I don't think America would be what it is today without somebody like Andrew Jackson. In many ways, he's comparable, in my opinion, to what Columbus is. You can complain about Columbus, and there's plenty of things to complain about Christopher Columbus for what he did to the natives, obviously, and the system that he helped set up. However, Columbus is essential to understanding not only the United States and its history, but the history of all the Western world, all of European history, and indeed much of Africa and Asian history as well. So world history is forever changed for Columbus, and whether you like it or not, the world is the way it is today because of figures like Columbus, and the United States is the way it is today because of figures like Andrew Jackson. So without further ado, please pull up a chair, sit down, get comfortable, get something nice to drink. I've got my coffee and my, as I suspected I was right all along, mug. Please like and subscribe to become a friendly neighborhood historian as I talk about Andrew Jackson, the seventh president of the United States, in a live stream lecture that I am titling How Can You Be Controversial and Yet Impactful at the Same Time, or something a little bit more catchy than that. And Cal Pro, I just answered exactly who that is. That is Andrew Jackson, the seventh president of the United States. I may change the background. I have plenty of pictures of Jackson in the gallery that I will be using. I didn't see the bingo card yet, but I will check it out. I'm not interacting with the chat as much as I usually do, because usually we're doing Q&A. Today I'm focusing on the lecture side of things. However, at 4 p.m. Eastern, when we usually start, because I didn't do a Q&A on Friday, I will be making up for it with an hour of Q&A for you at the end of this lecture about America's seventh president, Old Hickory himself. So Andrew Jackson is, I'm going to just give a rundown of his biography, and then I'll discuss his legacy. The biography is long and complex. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll go really fast. Whenever I think a lecture is going to go very slow, or not going to last long, it lasts an entire hour. And whenever I say a lecture isn't going to go, is going to take a long time, it takes me 30 minutes to sum it all up. So we'll see. And yes, I am History Hefner in my smoking jacket. Please like and subscribe and become a friendly neighborhood historian. It's all of that, and enjoy the story of Andrew Jackson, America's most controversial, by the way. Jackson is, by the way, is the founder of the Democratic Party, so we'll be talking about his political legacy as well as his presidential legacy. Andrew Jackson grows up with a mother and an older brother. He is fatherless, and Jackson has this characteristic of him. I'm not going to go too much into the psychology of Andrew Jackson. I'm not going to analyze the psychology. I am not a psychologist. I have read a lot of psychology, but I'm not an expert in the field at all. I can't necessarily say one way or another if this is necessarily true or false. But Jackson definitely seems to exhibit the traits of somebody who feels that he has to fend for himself and that he cannot trust other people, and it is up for him to determine his own legacy and values. This not only impacts his personality as he grows older, but it also impacts his presidential attitude and his attitude about politics in general. Andrew Jackson is very much the first populist president in American history, and he basically carries the mindset of America is this place where it is great because of the people, and the people need to make their own decisions without any sort of interference from the government, and I am just like the rest of those people. So he has a very similar he's very libertarian, very libertine in a lot of that, very much a tough, rough it in the woods kind of guy. If anyone loved the idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, it's definitely Andrew J., the 7th president, aka Old Hickory, and I'll be calling him various different things, the guy on the 20, all of that stuff. So, Andrew Jackson is born at the beginning of the American Revolutionary Movement, and he is very much formed by that. Not only does he not have a father, his mother and brother are killed by the British when the British attack North Carolina, and cavalry raids led by a man named Bannister Tarleton affect the local residents. Jackson's family is killed. This is a horrifyingly devastating thing that happens to him when he's about 12 years old. And because I believe at the very least his brother is killed, I think his mother is killed too. It's really formative. It's really jarring and awful for him. And so Jackson joins the American Revolutionary Movement. He is the last U.S. president to have served in the American Revolutionary War. Of the first 7 presidents, only John Quincy, all of them had either been involved with the Revolutionary Movement or the Revolutionary War. Jackson is the 3rd U.S. president to see battle time from the American Revolution after Monroe and George Washington. So Jackson is formed in many ways by the military. He is in the military at a very young age. There's no West Point back then, but he is someone who is definitely would have been in West Point. In fact, in many ways, the rough and tumble, gritty general, full metal jacket kind of R. Lee Ermey's type kind of summarizes Jackson's personality in many, many ways. And the more I think about Jackson's psychology and the more I think about Jackson's upbringing and all the problems that Jackson had in his life, the more I realize that Jackson is a really damaged individual who has a very much of an attitude of being hard on the exterior in order to get what you need. Not just what you want, but what you need. And people who are often in Jackson's position oftentimes conflate what they need with what they want in life. So I can understand a lot of Jackson's psychology going forward that will impact the way he handles himself as the President of the United States. By the way, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. If you're just joining us, this is our live stream lecture. I'm in my Friendly Neighborhood studio in my History Hefner smoking jacket robes, and we do this every Sunday, usually at 4 p.m. Eastern, but we're doing it an hour earlier so we can have Q&A afterwards. So please like and subscribe and enjoy the story of America's 7th president. Jackson joins the Army and acts as a scout. He is a bona fide veteran of the American Revolution, and he is the last president. He is fighting at 12, 13, and 14 years old in the American Revolution. He doesn't see a lot of fighting time, but he does work as a scout. He does become an expert horseman, and he loves riding his horses, and will, like many presidents, develop his own plantation in the South. Jefferson has Monticello, Madison had Montpelier, and Jackson will get what's called the Hermitage in Tennessee. No, not the museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. It is called the Hermitage. It is where he will stay, where he will be able to go back to in Tennessee, which will become his state. Now, he's originally from North Carolina. Tennessee is not a state. It becomes a state in 1796, I believe. And Jackson is a young man at that time, rising up in the political ranks. His military involvement will be repeated. He will continually be in and out of serving in the military in different positions, rising through the ranks, becoming a captain and a colonel and a general, and make his bones in Tennessee. That's where most of his life will be centered around. And Jackson is very much a Western frontiersman and has the attitude of a Western frontiersman. And yes, Jackson was very much a lunatic, and I will get more into that in many different ways. Jackson serves the position of the of the Western frontiersman, the pioneer. He will not only be a part of that movement, but he will very much encapsulate it. And a huge part of the Western frontiersman, the pioneer movement, is a sense of rugged individualism and the ability to pick yourself up by the bootstraps, which already connects very well with Jackson's own psychology and mental acuity. So this is how this is not only who Jackson is, this is who Jackson is around, growing up, coming of age, becoming a militarily successful, accomplished general, as well as a politician in Tennessee. Now, the fascinating thing about Tennessee and these areas is that in the late 1700s, this is still the Western frontier and the Western territory. That means that many of the citizens and people who are living in these areas are constantly having problems with Native Americans. This will shape Jackson's attitude about Native Americans as he basically comes to believe that they are a total nuisance, wild savages, merciless, and deserving of death and destruction, which is an attitude shared not just by Jackson, but many of the American presidents in the 18th, 19th, and even into the 20th centuries. So Jackson's attitude about the Native Americans is shaped by his development on the frontier, his military experience, his attitude about individualism, the pioneer, the average everyday man, the yeoman farmer. These are all Jeffersonian principles that are reinterpreted by Jackson's experiences in the Western territories and the pioneer area of Tennessee where he grows up. You have a lot of pioneers, you have a lot of people traveling the Cumberland Gap, you have a lot of people going back to Daniel Boone who kind of settled this area as the American frontier throughout much of the 1700s, and the rugged individualism that is stereotypical for Western landscapes in American history impacts Jackson and those around him. So Jackson is surrounded by people who think similarly to him, who believe it is by their own strength, willpower, and freedom that they are actually able to achieve things, and they love that idea of America being a place for them to achieve things, to expand, to move westward, to settle, to build a life for themselves. All of these things that sound very much like a rugged, patriotic American individualism that we see today in our politics was part and parcel of Jackson's political and social development and the political and social development of that entire region. Jackson's popularity with the common man will be indicative of how much the common man sees himself as an individual and somebody who builds themselves up from poverty to become successful. Jackson was born in a log cabin. Jackson's family died at a young age. Jackson had to fight in a rough and tumble war where he risked his life fighting for the American cause. Jackson rose through the military ranks to become an Indian fighter, and many people on the frontiers hate the Indians because the Indians are constantly at odds with them, because the land that the Indians had was being taken rather mercilessly, and the Indians themselves are being treated rather mercilessly by these frontier settlers. This doesn't bother Jackson because people like Jackson believe the natives don't deserve the land. This will impact one of his biggest decisions when he becomes president, and of course will impact his continual political activity and military activity before that as well. So Jackson is rising up in an age of people and an area of people that feel a lot like him. His popularity with the common man will explode later on, but meanwhile in Tennessee, he serves as a district judge. He serves as a congressman. He serves as a senator. He serves as a military general, as a military governor. He does these different roles all throughout the 1790s, kind of doing various odd political jobs, never really situating himself in the Washington political insider sphere, despite being elected a congressman and a senator. I believe he's also elected governor of Tennessee at one point. I think it's in the early 1800s. And Jackson's reputation is of a tough-talking, no-nonsense guy who says exactly what's on his mind and damn the consequences of that. It's Jackson's attitude of his brusqueness, his brashness, his ability to just talk straight from the hip and shoot straight from the hip that makes him popular with local people around him and will give him the airs, despite being an experienced and savvy politician, of not being a politician at all. If this sounds like an American president you're familiar with, please drop who you think that is in the chat, because we all know who you're thinking of right now, because I'm thinking of him too, unfortunately. The fact of the matter is, Jackson's popularity stems from his ability to appear as though he is not a Washington insider. And in many ways, Jackson never is a Washington insider, but he is somebody who is experienced in politics and does know a lot about how the American political world works. And if you're just joining us, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and our live stream lecture on America's 7th president. Jackson gets married, I think, in 1793. And this is actually a very controversial marriage. He marries a woman who's slightly older, Rachel Donaldson. It's not impossible, even in the 18th century, for men to marry a woman who's slightly older than them. But there will be complications from this later on. Rachel becomes the great love of Andrew Jackson's life. I trying to remember if they have any children themselves. I don't believe they have children themselves, but she has children from a previous marriage that Jackson kind of co-adopts. And Jackson is wildly protective of her. And in many ways, Rachel is the opposite of Andrew. She's calm, patient, kind, very sweet, very demure, very preppy. Jackson's this brusque, harsh fighter. You very much got a Beauty and the Beast scenario going on, but you have probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, love matches in all of American presidential history. People think about Barack and Michelle. Maybe they think about Ronald and Nancy. People don't think about older American presidents and their close relationship with their wives, but John Adams and Abigail Adams have a very, very loving relationship. Dolly Madison and James Madison, who were just before Jackson in the White House, have a very close relationship and are very loving, despite the fact that they are total polar opposites. And Jackson and Rachel are exactly polar opposites, but they are very much in love. And perhaps Jackson's loss of a family at such a young age, the fact that he didn't have a father, makes him utterly protective of her, believing that his job is to protect her at any cost because he might lose her at any time. And this leads to Jackson getting his reputation as being a barman, someone who fights and brawls in saloons and stuff. If you think of a president being a Wild West cowboy, you probably think of Ronald Reagan because of all of his acting in Westerns, or you think of that kind of thing. George W. Bush had this mantra, but if there's any American president who is the saloon fighter, it's definitely an Andrew Jackson type figure. Jackson gets into fights, he gets into fist fights all the time, and he loves to duel. Dueling is illegal and seen as low class for the lowbrow sorts of people in the world. However, Jackson doesn't care about this. In fact, Jackson uses everything that is hated by the higher classes and the educated, the elite, and the rich to basically bolster his ability to rise into those classes and become powerful and strong. Indeed, his political experience, his military experience, his pension from his military service helps him eventually develop an extremely large plantation with quite a number of slaves on it called the Hermitage. And this is where him and as the name might suggest, hermit, it is a place for him to be alone and be secluded with his wife and to enjoy the comforts of life. Jackson, despite the fact that he talks very much like your average everyday man, is a very, very rich politician in many, many different ways. And again, the parallels to a Donald Trump figure are quite interesting because Trump talks like an everyday average man despite being a billionaire. Now, or at least pretends to. And how much of this is Jackson pretending? How much of this is political savvy? We don't really know. There's a lot of complexity to it, and I will revisit this issue soon. But Jackson feels the need to defend his wife and his family and everything that he has grown from his life. So whenever he is insulted, he once said, "I will forgive anyone who insults me personally, but I will never forgive anyone who insults my wife." And he gets into duels. He shoots and kills people in these duels. He even has a bullet lodged in his chest from one of the duels that he can never remove because it's too close to his heart and doctors were worried they would kill him. Now, doctors did kill another president, James Garfield, when they tried to remove a bullet from him about 45 years after Jackson was president, but that's another story and another live stream lecture for another time. But like and subscribe for more content about the U.S. presidents, such as my presidential tier ranking video, which should be in the chat very soon, and you can learn exactly what I think of each U.S. president overall. And my opinion about Andrew Jackson has changed, so stay tuned to see what I actually think about him now. And yeah, Andrew Jackson is kind of this Chad. He is this fighter, this macho man. He kind of, at the very least, this is the persona that he gives as being this frontiersman, this man born in a log cabin, comes up from poverty, becomes powerful, becomes strong, becomes successful, becomes a military expert, becomes a politician, becomes a local leader, and gains the heart and the trust of the people in his area of the world who feel and think about the world the same way that he does. And this is what's going to make Jackson such a popular figure in the years to come. However, Jackson continually goes in and out of the military, fighting the various Indian wars, of which there are dozens in the 19th century in the United States that you probably don't know much about. Presidents like Lincoln and Jackson, yes, Abraham Lincoln served in the military very briefly, will serve in different Indian wars, fighting in different areas. But it's really the War of 1812 that will make Jackson a hero. And it's kind of a fluke, an absolute fluke that makes Andrew Jackson a hero through the War of 1812. Let me explain. Jackson is fighting on the frontier. He has been fighting against the Indians. Natives are very sympathetic to the British during the War of 1812. And in 1814, late in the war, when peace negotiations are already well underway, Jackson is tasked with taking a small ragtag group of a few hundred American soldiers and guarding the port city of New Orleans, which was bought by the Louisiana Purchase back in 1803. This is a relatively new city and a relatively new state, Louisiana becoming a state in 1812, but New Orleans is a particularly important harbor for the Americans, and Jackson is tasked with defending it against a force of British force that is thousands strong. Jackson is actually able to successfully do this, and he wins a huge victory, overwhelming and defeating the British forces in January of 1815. What he doesn't know is that the Treaty of Ghent has already been signed and agreed upon, but news has not reached America yet that the war is officially over. So the British don't know, the Americans don't know, and it really doesn't count. It's kind of like hitting a half-court shot after the buzzer. However, it is impressive enough to put Jackson on display as this huge hero who won a huge victory for the Americans. He's tough, he's hard-nosed, he's mean, he's spitting and scratching and all of the stuff that you think of as kind of this brutish He-Man. And he's tough like Hickory Wood, so his soldiers come to call the general Old Hickory. Because he is as tough as the wood hickory. And hickory is, once again, a wood that is very, very familiar to Southern cuisine and culture. So remember, Andrew Jackson is a Southerner through and through. We don't think about Andrew Jackson. We talk about the South. We talk about the Confederacy and the pre-Confederate era of the United States. But Andrew Jackson is a Southerner. And in many ways, he creates the motif of the Democratic Party being the party of pro-slavery in the 1830s and 40s. But more on that later. Jackson's victory at New Orleans propels him into national stardom, and all of a sudden you have a new sheriff in town who has caught the attention of the American people. And nobody's ever really had this before in American political history, where you have a clear man with presidential and powerful aspirations who's on the scene, who's extraordinarily popular with the common man, and has reached the status of being a celebrity. We see it so much nowadays that it's almost ad nauseum. You have particular politicians who clearly stand out and have presidential aspirations and goals, who are working on this stuff years before. Now they're joining podcast culture and all of this stuff. But Andrew Jackson is the first real one in American history to stand out for his popularity with the common man. Jackson believes that the government's job is to keep the Union together, but also to advocate for those common individuals and make sure that they don't get in their way to achieve their highest goals and aims. And if the government does get involved, it is to help the people, not to hinder them. And so Andrew Jackson is really the first American populist. Jackson believes that he is fulfilling the dreams of Thomas Jefferson by advocating for the democratic spirit of individual rights and liberties being placed on a high pedestal and not being interfered with by the American government. And if I'm not interacting with the chat, I apologize. It's only because I'm going through the lecture. And you may think that I'm reading from notes, but I'm going completely off the cuff. And you may think that I'm using studio equipment. This is all stuff that I've purchased myself. So please like and subscribe and consider giving a super chat, because anything you give to this channel does help it. But anyways, back to the story. Andrew Jackson is now a national celebrity on a huge scale, and the American people are in love with him, and they've never seen this before. This man who believes he's fighting to continue the Jeffersonian dream, and he will continue to pop up in the headlines as somebody with presidential aspirations. Now, I'm going to talk about Andrew Jackson will claim later on that he will be the fulfillment of Thomas Jefferson's democratic ideals of the common, average, ordinary man having a better idea than the government. But Thomas Jefferson considers Jackson to be a very dangerous man. Jefferson wasn't interested in a populist revolution or a demagogue. Jefferson was much more interested in the idea of a philosophical concept coming from the Enlightenment and John Locke and Voltaire, where basically the individual is given the right to pursue his or her own desires and goals without the infringement from the government, and the government doesn't serve as a safeguard, as a vanguard assisting the person along the way. Jackson is far more interested in a populist agenda than any of the founding fathers were, and he has far more of a popular platform as a national hero and celebrity than any of them do, perhaps except with the exception of George Washington. Now that's kind of hard to think about because all the founding fathers have an extremely storied reputation in American history despite their many failings. So people like Franklin and Washington and Adams and Jefferson probably get more attention today than Andrew Jackson does. But that doesn't change the fact that they're still not politicians. They're statesmen trying to do their job to bring about an American system. Many of them are more on the intellectual side. And Jackson is more of a celebrity appealing to the common man. In many ways, Andrew Jackson may be the first politician in American history. although he is in competition with another man for that role, and that man is John Quincy Adams, who has one of the most and the way Jefferson and Adams have one of the most complex relationships in American political history. The next generation of Jackson and John Quincy Adams will have a very, very similar disconnect between the two of them. And this starts during the presidency of James Monroe, who I've talked about a few weeks ago, who's one of my favorite presidents, who is president from 1817 to 1825 after the War of 1812. Monroe, knowing Jackson is a capable general, sends Jackson to fight Seminole Indians who are raiding areas in Georgia. This fear of continual incursions by the Seminoles in Georgia, which, by the way, that's why one of the college teams in Florida is named the Seminoles, because they're originally from Florida, gets Jackson hot on their trail in 1819, and Jackson chases them all the way down to Florida itself. Now, Andrew Jackson is in many ways the stereotypical first Florida man, doing something brash and impulsive just because he thinks it's a good idea or just because it's Saturday. Who cares? Basically, what happens is Florida has been controlled by the Spanish for eons, although there are small little times when the English and the French have controlled it. But the Spanish have controlled Florida since the 1500s. Florida has the oldest settlement in all of the 50 U.S. states, St. Augustine, and the oldest continuous settlement in that area. And Jackson shows up and has this idea of basically taking it away from the Spanish. Jackson is a meritocratic. Basically a believer in the meritocracy. Jackson believes that whoever does something right and is good at their job deserves to be in control of something. It doesn't matter who was there first. All that matters is, can you handle something correctly? In some ways, Jackson is kind of an imperialist. Basically, the Spanish governor in Florida had been corrupt. There was a corrupt political machine in Florida that had basically given tacit approval to allow the Seminole Indians to continue to raid American settlers and farmers in Georgia, and this prompts Jackson to basically make a unilateral decision without getting consent from the Secretary of State, the Secretary of War, or the president who sent him to do that, James Monroe, and Jackson basically captures Florida. He invades Florida, he overthrows the governor, and basically declares Florida is an American territory. This risks war with the Spanish Empire. Spain has bigger problems to deal with, the fact that their Latin American empire is collapsing and they are recovering from the domination of the Bonapartes. Definitely kind of hinders them from a potential war. But there is another potential for a war between a major European power and the United States just 5 years after the White House was burned. It looks like Jackson's political career, his military career, might be over. John C. Calhoun, the Secretary of War, who you will hear about again, says that Jackson is an idiot and is too brash and impulsive, and Calhoun probably has a point, but the Secretary of State is a man named John Quincy Adams, the son of the second president, John Adams. John Quincy Adams says, hey, this was a brave and courageous move, and let's not reprimand him. He's actually done us a big favor, and maybe we can actually make something work out of this. So Monroe negotiates the purchase with John Quincy Adams of Florida, and that's how the U.S. gets Florida. The way the U.S. gets Florida is the total Florida man story, with Andrew Jackson going in there, kicking butt and taking names and basically saying, this is mine now, deal with it, which is something Jackson will continue to do throughout most of his political career. It's actually quite fascinating how bold Andrew Jackson is and how he doesn't care about anything. In many ways, if you think of America as an angry person getting their things done no matter what, you're probably thinking of Andrew Jackson. In some ways, Andrew Jackson might be the first stereotypical American. Especially for our friends who are all across the world, particularly in Europe. So Jackson has the national popularity. He is the conqueror of Florida. He is the hero of New Orleans. He is Old Hickory. He is one of the most controversial men. He's known for his gambling, his drinking, his fighting, his inability to follow Sunday regulations, which do exist in a very religious American society. And despite his religious convictions, he is very, very much a sinner rather than a saint. However, he appeals to the common man, and the common man sees Jackson as representative of him. This pioneer from the frontier who roughed it and made a life out of it after being born in a log cabin, going from poverty, rags to riches. He's an incredible story of inspiration, hope, and individualism, and the common people, particularly the common people in the western and southern parts of the United States who see themselves as more frontier-based, definitely see Andrew Jackson as their man. So this is where Andrew Jackson decides that it's time for him to enter the political scene in a serious way, and he decides to run for president in 1824. Now, the election of 1824 is one of the most interesting elections in American history, and Mr. Beat has a great video on it and all U.S. presidential elections, and I know I'll get around to making videos about presidential elections at some point as well. But basically, I think the election of 1824 is probably the most interesting U.S. election. Basically, 5 guys decide they all want to run for president. There are not 5 different political parties. In fact, there's not even 2. The Federalist Party has collapsed. James Monroe has basically destroyed it by becoming one of the best presidents we never talk about. Again, watch my live stream lecture about him to learn more about what a great guy he actually was. And yeah, if there is anyone, Kyler, who kind of represents the guns, whiskey, freedom, and God's kind of attitude and motif, it's Andrew Jackson. You have only one political party. It was originally called the Republican Party. Now it's the Democratic Republican Party. And you have different shades within the party who all kind of base their claims on their economic policy, but also their close association with different areas of the country. You have Jackson, who is popular in the South and the West and with the common man. You have William Crawford, the Secretary of the Treasury, who is from the middle of the country, a kind of a Washington Beltway insider. You have John Quincy Adams, now stepping in to fulfill the roles that Secretary of States had done time and time again by becoming President of the United States. And Adams of course, has the legacy, he has the connections. He's much more of a mercantilist, much more interested in New England mercantile establishments and protectionism and things of that nature. And indeed, Jackson himself is actually quite sympathetic to tariffs. It's interesting the way Andrew Jackson runs the country when he becomes president. So you have John Quincy Adams, who represents the big business interests of New England. He represents that Puritan kind of motif, that old ideal of the Congregationalists and Unitarians. Very much the hotbed of the American Revolutionary Movement and the generations that come after it. He is, of course, the son of the second president of the United States, who is still alive at this point, John Adams. And so you have Crawford, you have Adams, you have Jackson, and you have Henry Clay. Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, one of the rising stars in American politics. For everything Jackson has done on the frontier and on the military front, Clay has done it within Congress, becoming one of the most celebrated heroes in the American political scene at the time. He is the expert who pushed America to go to war with Great Britain. I use that sarcastically, but he is also the expert who wrote the Compromise of 1820, or the Missouri Compromise, which stabilized the nation amidst the crisis over slavery. Now, there's also John C. Calhoun, who wants to run but really never gets a headway, but he's the Secretary of War and he's very interested in being president one day. Hold that thought. So you have 5 men who have 5 very different attitudes about each other and about where they come from. Clay is from Kentucky. He's kind of this central western kind of guy. Calhoun is a deep southerner from South Carolina. And you have Jackson from the west, you have Crawford from the middle, and you have John Quincy Adams from the north. And they're going to gain their political support from those different areas. This is also the first time the popular vote is counted in a presidential election, and Jackson wins a plurality. He wins the most amount of electoral votes, and he wins the most amount of the popular vote. However, he doesn't get the majority of the electoral votes that the Constitution requires for a presidential candidate to become president. This had already happened, by the way, in 1800 when a tie on the Electoral College, which was based on legislative votes then, had led the House of Representatives to choose Thomas Jefferson over Aaron Burr, and Burr was so mad that he killed Alexander Hamilton for this 4 years later. Now you know how that story goes. Yes, you learned that in about 20 seconds. Good job. So Andrew Jackson has the advantage, and he knows Henry Clay, and Clay will basically become Jackson's #1 political foe because of this. John Quincy Adams becomes president. He's second place in electoral votes. So the way it works is the top 3 go to the House of Representatives: Jackson, Adams, and Crawford. Clay is kicked out, but Clay is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And by the way, this is not about popular vote. This is all based on Electoral College tallies. So Jackson and Adams are in it to win it. Crawford has a stroke and drops out. So Clay gets to basically use his influence in the House of Representatives to sway the Democrats or the Democratic Republicans or the Republicans, whatever you want to call them. They're all the same party. There's all really one dominant political party. There's a leftover fragment of the Federalists who will become known as National Republicans and later Whigs. And Clay will join them later on, believe it or not. But Clay has the ability to sway and turn the heads of Congress people to vote for which president they want. And he picks John Quincy Adams. And Jackson is infuriated by this because Adams then picks Clay as his Secretary of State. which is a stepping stone to the White House. So once again, Andrew Jackson feels that he has been robbed of an opportunity in his life because of someone else. He was robbed of a father. He was robbed of a family. He was robbed of his wife's innocence was constantly attacked. His wife's decency was constantly attacked. Jackson feels that he is the victim. He plays the victim very well, and he uses it to create a narrative. And it very much also fits with the stereotypical American idea of the underdog. The Americans have been the underdog in the Revolution. They've been the underdog in the War of 1812. And now Andrew Jackson is able to seize upon that energy as being the underdog who had the election stolen from him by what was called the corrupt bargain. Jackson will use this as his motif and a launching pad to create his own political wing and allow his followers in Congress who believe he has been robbed of it to stonewall the efforts of John Quincy Adams. Adams and Clay develop a infrastructure building system that will become outdated pretty soon because of railroads, but is actually pretty effective, called the American system, building highways, bridges, canals, and roadways so that Americans can get from one place to another, also creating canals and easier access for steamboats, which are becoming more common. The Industrial Revolution is hitting America, and John Quincy Adams understands this and is actually very effective. If John Quincy Adams didn't have a corrupt bargain and Andrew Jackson hanging over his head, he probably would have been a very successful American president. But because he's accused of being corrupt, he suffers this label throughout the rest of his presidency, is unable to get done what he wants, and is constantly being attacked by Jackson, who plans to make a political comeback against him in 1828. Does this sound familiar? A president focused on infrastructural development, never able to get done what he needs to, constantly being stonewalled by Congress, who supports the guy who believes the election was stolen from him because of corruption. It's just fascinating how history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Jackson builds and crafts the narrative of the underdog, that they have stopped me from getting what I deserve, what I should have had, rightfully so. I was the one who should have won. And this guy is bad news. He's corrupt and he will destroy our country if he's allowed to continue doing this. You've got to support me, and you've got to make sure that your representative keeps him in check. Jackson's followers become known as Democrats. Adams' followers become known as the National Republicans and later the Whigs. And this will lead to a huge divide. Although both men will run as Democratic Republicans, although Adams will still consider himself a Democratic Republican in 1828. So you've got a perfect narrative building up for another really momentous election in American history in 1828 between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. The Democratic Party has stonewalled Adams' infrastructural developments. Jackson will steal these and use them during his own presidency and basically get done whatever he wants because the Democrats will control Congress for the bulk of his presidency. He has turned to his political advisor, a man named Martin Van Buren, who will become extremely important later, who will basically be the rubber stamp for Jackson's political agenda, and through his own political savvy and his brilliance as an educated upstate New Yorksman, will be able to create a political machine that basically serves Jackson whenever he wants, and this becomes the Democratic Party. Although Van Buren and Jackson are extremely different men with very different attitudes as well. Van Buren probably deserves his own live stream lecture at some point, although he's not considered a particularly good American president. He is a particularly interesting American overall. Maybe the smartest politician of the 19th century, believe it or not. So Jackson uses a narrative, crafts the narrative, whether it's true or not, of corruption in order to seal the deal in his revenge tour of 1828. And 1828 is just mudslinging between the two of them. One of the dirtiest, if not the dirtiest, campaign in American history. People believe that John Quincy Adams has been robbed because Jackson basically stonewalled him, and so Adams deserves another chance. And everyone thinks back to 1824 when they think of Andrew Jackson. And now all that matters is the personal character of both men, because they are policy-wise very, very similar, which is not exactly the same to the parallels you're probably thinking of. But the real truth of the matter is that the 1828 campaign, as much of Jackson's life, really comes down to a measurement of character. And how much does your character influence your politics, and how much does your character influence the way you will govern and run the country? This is absolutely huge for Andrew Jackson. And this is absolutely huge for his entire legacy and for understanding these men. You see a transition away from the statesmen where character wasn't an issue towards politicians and populists who will make promises to you. Will they fulfill their promises? Are they reliable? Are they trustworthy? And Adams is able to point at Jackson's many personal failings. He's a brawler, he's a fighter, he's a duelist. And Jackson's fans will basically say, yeah, this is why we like him. This is what we like about him. We like that he's brutish. We like that he's rude. We like that he gets in your face. We like that he's disrespectful, that he curses and swears and throws things. We like his temper. We like these things about him. You don't seem to understand that everything that you think is so off-putting is exactly why we love him so much, and we will defend him because he will defend us. He fights for us, and he fights hard, and he fights dirty, and he bites when he's in the ring, but we don't care because he's going to win, and he's going to win for us. However, personal insults are common. Jackson's side accuses Adams of pimping for the Russian Tsar when he served as a foreign diplomat and as the Secretary of State. They attack his wife for being a British citizen, for being a British national. John Quincy Adams just endures constant attacks and criticisms, providing a young American virgin for the Russian Tsar. I mean, none of which actually turns out to be true, but people really don't care. They're angry at Adams. They're angry at Clay for the corrupt bargain, and they're just going to throw anything, any stick is good enough to beat John Quincy Adams over the head with. Now, John Quincy Adams has not helped himself. He has refused to fire his political opponents. He has the deck stacked against him, and his own stubborn, self-assured attitude has made his presidency a living hell, very much like his father's presidency. However, what's interesting is that John Quincy Adams, despite all of this, stands a puncher's chance because he can bring up things about Jackson's personality that are off-putting to a lot of American people. And what's off-putting in 1828 is not off-putting coming up on 2028, but it is kind of interesting that Andrew Jackson, the biggest scandal of the campaign, of which there are many scandals, both true and false, being thrown about, is an actual true scandal, and it is not about Jackson, it is about his wife. It turns out that Rachel Donaldson did not get a full divorce from her husband before marrying Andrew Jackson. Now, this is called bigamy. Basically, a woman or a man is still technically married to someone else, has not obtained a divorce, and marries someone without being fully separated from their other partner. It's not polygamy, bigamy, two partners. So you get bi from that. So basically, Andrew Jackson's wife is lambasted for this. Jackson is accused of living in sin. She is considered an adulteress. These are huge ramifications in an overly religious society. Even Jackson's pioneer buddies and countrymen and frontiersmen are very much, by every moral standard of today, extremely traditional and conservative, and this is a massive scandal. This might have even been a massive scandal 25 years ago. I don't see it being a massive scandal if it turns out to be true in 2028. Politicians having affairs is just kind of run of the money. And Jackson is horrified at this, and he blames Henry Clay for it because Clay knew the guy who published the article, and Clay tries to back away. Jackson isn't going to let that happen. And this is going to have to be a two-part lecture because I'm going to have to lecture about Jackson's early life and then his presidency, just like my Richard Nixon live stream lecture, because Jackson is just such a fantastic and interesting figure, and fantastic in the sense of crazy, or maybe amazing. It's really hard to look at him and without using one to describe Andrew Jackson in one word, using one adjective. So what happens? Jackson is able to overcome this scandal. Basically, Rachel and him didn't know about this. The divorce was finalized years later. It really had kind of gone under the watch, and neither of them had really been aware of it. And it catches them unawares, and it threatens to destroy his campaign. But at the end of the day, Jackson wins. Jackson takes Adams' vice president, John C. Calhoun, as his vice president, which will be one of the most confusing relationships, as once again, vice presidential politics was not figured out at that time, and it took a long time for it to be figured out, and some say it's never been figured out properly in American history. But Andrew Jackson assumes the White House in 1828, winning with only two men in the race. It's easy for him to win a majority of the electoral vote. His popularity of the common man comes in clutch for him, and Andrew Jackson is elected the nation's seventh president, pushing out John Quincy Adams, who refuses to attend his inauguration. And Jackson moves into the White House in March of 1829 because it used to take a lot longer for information and travel, so presidents used to be inaugurated in March instead of January. And Jackson basically goes into the White House and does what any populist would do. He throws a huge, lavish ball and basically turns the White House into an open house. People are getting drunk and early in the morning before he even gives his inaugural address. And then when he walks to the White House, The people follow him and basically turn it into a lavish frat party for the rest of the day. Jackson's presidency has already started off with an appeal to the common man, a decision to side with them, and to basically make the people's house very much the people's house by allowing people to cavort around it drunk throughout much of the day. This is going to be the motif and the mood that sets the tone for Jackson's presidency. A man that is extremely accessible to the people, where, and this is true for many U.S. presidents of the time, where basically there is no Secret Service. People go to the president's house all the time and visit him during office hours and ask questions. Washington, D.C. is a very small town. It is not the big metropolis that it is today. And easy access to the American executive is just part of how things work at that time. So Jackson has set an attitude of populism, an attitude of the people of him being accessible, and of him being one of the people, and the rabble-rousers, the low class, the lowbrow people are his people. Don't you dare talk down to them, because he's going to defend them no matter what he does. And throughout his 8 years in the White House, he will actually live up to many of these promises. His presidency is a controversial one, to say the least. However, it starts with a giant personal cloud and suffering over Jackson's own personal life, which probably calls your attention back to the beginning of the live stream lecture, where I discussed Jackson's sense of loss and the sense of him being alone and needing to do everything on his own. Jackson lost his father before he was born. He lost his mother and his brother during the American Revolution. Rachel dies several weeks before Jackson leaves to go to Washington, D.C. She does not serve as First Lady. It is his niece it is either his niece or her daughter that acts as the hostess. This has never happened, by the way. There's always been a First Lady. So Andrew Jackson enters the White House like Thomas Jefferson did. Oh, it happened with Jefferson. Like Thomas Jefferson did, a widower, but a recent widower who says that he does forgive everyone who slighted him, but not anyone who slighted his wife. Jackson believes that Rachel, who has had heart attacks in the past, basically through the pressure of becoming First Lady and through the horrid actions of the campaign, which saw her name slammed and dragged through the mud over and over again, dies because of that. So Jackson swears revenge on his political enemies and goes into the White House with a mandate from the people to be the people's president that he believes he is, but also to take revenge for the sake of his wife's honor on all of his political enemies. And Henry Clay will be the major victim of that. But Jackson will do this to many other people in his throughout his presidency. You have a revolving door within his cabinet. You have problems with different members of his cabinet. You have issues with the American economic system. And you have Jackson sometimes seemingly making policy decisions based completely on his own personal whims and ideas and not based on political policy. Andrew Jackson is a capricious executive, but he's an extraordinarily effective one, often using manipulation, screaming, yelling, and anger, and rants and raves in his own bravado to basically achieve whatever he thinks is best for him and the American people. Sometimes it seems utterly personal, and sometimes it seems utterly selfless. But Andrew Jackson's presidency for the next 8 years will be one of achievement of things that both make sense completely from his own political side, yet also seem completely personally motivated based on how he's feeling because of this person or that person acting in a certain way. Jackson's staff and cabinet meetings are basically tantamount to to Jackson throwing a fit, basically intimidating whoever he is discussing things with, and then basically acting like he was playing up an act the entire time so that everyone would basically capitulate and do whatever he wants. So Jackson is a very, very volatile figure. In fact, he becomes reliant on what's known as his kitchen cabinet because he doesn't trust his own cabinet to get things done for him. And so that's Andrew Jackson's, that'll have to be part one. We'll have to do part two on Andrew Jackson and look at his presidency and his legacy and his very interesting life after his presidency next Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll be back to our normal broadcast time then. Because to just talk about his presidency would probably take another 45 minutes, and my lectures usually go about 40 to 50 minutes long, and we're already at minute 48, and there's just so much to cover about Andrew Jackson, and I was right. It's going to be a long lecture. So you'll have to join us next week to hear the other half of Andrew Jackson's story, especially focusing on his presidency and his impact and how he changed American history. There'll be a lot more to discuss, such as Indian removal, Jackson's interactions with the Supreme Court, the kitchen cabinet, Martin Van Buren's presidency, presidency, Jackson's war with the Bank of the United States, and how Andrew Jackson is the only president to set America debt-free during his tenure. So, lot to look at from Andrew Jackson, a lot more to learn about Andrew Jackson, and keep in mind the personality of loneliness, of abandonment, of individualism that will not only impact his mind, his actions, and indeed his entire political movement, which will change American history forever. Sometimes our own psychology is the biggest motivator of the changes and the things that we achieve in our lives. And it's certainly the case with Andrew Jackson. And when you're the president of the United States with such a popular appeal as an Andrew Jackson and such a powerful personality as an Andrew Jackson, it can have ramifications that continue to affect America to this day. And that's why the guy's on the dang $20 bill. But anyways, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm sorry if I haven't interacted with the chat that much. I've been doing the live stream lecture side of things. And yes, believe it or not, all of this was off the cuff as I continually just draw from whatever information I can think of to discuss the incredible, although literally the unbelievable legacy of Andrew Jackson, both good and bad, which I will be delving into next week when we talk about his presidency. So remember what I've talked about today and how it might shape my discussion to next Sunday when we discuss Andrew Jackson, America's most controversial yet impactful president. So please like and subscribe. And I've got an hour of Q&A lined up for all of you, like I promised, to make up from last week. So this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, and this is our Q&A section. I'm going to change the background to another historical theme. I hope you enjoyed the live stream lecture about Andrew Jackson. We're really glad that you're here. And if you have a question about history or social studies, please drop it in the chat. I would be happy to discuss it with all of you. And I hope you're having a really wonderful Sunday. And we really appreciate you spending your weekend with us to discuss history and social sciences. Here's a very fitting Jacksonian background, America in the middle of the 19th century. I'm going to just change the background, but it is very, very fitting for the topic we've had at hand. What background do I want to use now? You know what? I'm going to use one of my favorite historical paintings, and it's Napoleon and Pope Oh yes, this is friendly history. We do things in a friendly manner, and hopefully you like the background. I do love the story of Napoleon basically stealing the crown away from Pius VII and putting it on his head. Can you hear me now? Okay, I think we're back now. Okay. Yeah, I was talking about Napoleon, and I was discussing, him putting the Pope on arrest. I haven't seen the movie yet. I should. I want to go back and see the movie from the 1970s. I was watching a video about the Pope and Napoleon, and I just think it's so fascinating because we often think of Napoleon as this just totally religious, military figure. Then we sometimes think about the history and the politics of the First French Empire, how Napoleon completed the revolution, but we don't think about Napoleon as a domestic reformer. All of the reforms he made to law and education, the way he spread the ideas of the French Revolution, for better or worse, all around the world. We don't think about that enough, and we don't think about Napoleon's relationship with kind of restoring the religious life of France, where Napoleon was kind of a moderate revolutionary who also took all of the revolutionary ideas and spread them all around Europe, although the fact he didn't really live by them or seem to practice them himself. So it's just really interesting to me. He's such a complex character, and I think this painting shows Napoleon's complexity. You have him looking at the Pope. It's almost like he's looking to him for approval, and the Pope just looks uncomfortable and doesn't want to say anything to upset him, but at the same time clearly doesn't approve of whatever Napoleon is reading to him. Napoleon has a will to power that would make Nietzsche jealous, and I think Nietzsche is thinking of him. So anyways, questions about history and social sciences, I'll stick around and answer them. Yeah, it's 7th or 8th, I think. I don't know which Pius it was. Would Jackson have marked those pathetic cowards we currently have in Congress? Jackson absolutely hated he thinks that Jackson would have absolutely seemed to hate the political process and believe that he should be able to do unilaterally what he wanted, to achieve what he wanted, and wasn't very much interested in the parliamentary procedure of Congress. He served in Congress. He's an experienced politician. He's a savvy politician, but as long as they're rubber stamping him, he was fine with it. Yeah. You didn't know his wife was a noble and was under arrest. Yes, Josephine de Beauharnais. Yeah, it's an incredible story. Married to a much older man, he dies. She has this affair with Napoleon. Napoleon was younger than her. Was Plato homosexual? Many Greek men of that time period were indeed were gay, at least in the sense of they had homosexual relationships. I don't know if many of them who were straight had homosexual experiences, encounters. It was more. There was a certain amount of social acceptance to it, where they didn't think about things in sexualized binaries of gay or straight. It was much more of people who were married to women often had homosexual encounters. So I don't know. I'm trying to think if Plato was married. Yeah. How did Andrew Jackson's view on the national bank develop over time? Where did he get it from? Jackson hated anything that had national and federal implications when he believed states and local people could handle it themselves. Jackson's a huge advocate of the 9th and 10th Amendment. I'll talk about that more next week. But basically, Jackson's hatred of the bank comes from that, but also Nicholas Biddle and his association with Henry Clay is a huge red flag to Andrew Jackson. He views Clay as a thorn in his side, and he has no desire. So in order to lash out and take a swing at Clay politically and personally, he destroys the Bank of the United States and makes sure that Van Buren follows through after his presidency is over. This causes a total economic collapse because they're not able to actually handle monetary policy during the Panic of 1837 and 1838. But yeah. How did the world go from monarchies and theocracies to left-wing socialism and communism versus right-wing republicanism and liberalism? Well, monarchies and theocracies die out when people basically get the idea that they don't want somebody who speaks for God representing them because they don't know who speaks for God or if God speaks at all. The Enlightenment is the place where a lot of those ancient philosophies that were already political philosophies that were already straining under the weight of their own inertia, under the weight of their own stagnation, were already dying. But monarchy develops from this idea of basically people believing that if you're related to somebody great, you must be great. Meritocracy is really what replaces it, and meritocracy is the bedrock of democracy. The idea that if you earn something or if you prove to be capable at something, that should be the qualification, not because you're related to somebody who is great, because you have so many examples of great kings in English history, like Edward Longshanks having an idiot son, Edward II, or a terrible king having a son who turned out to be a great king. Edward II has Edward III, who's one of the greatest kings in English history. So it's this idea of getting away from blue-blooded ideas of just thinking because you come from a noble line and noble lineage and the landed gentry that you are therefore better than I am. You might have better access to education and social awareness, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily better. And it ties into Jackson, who definitely has this idea of destabilizing the old social contract of the patronage system of late colonial and early America, where basically you have this obligation to somebody who is in a higher position in life, and the reason they're in a higher position in life is because their father was in that high position in life. So did Andrew Jackson not like Alexander Hamilton? He wouldn't have. I don't know how much he knew, how much he interacted with him before then. But anyways, I believe our people are either Islamophobic or anti-Semitic. You can't be both or neither. What do you think? I don't want to really speculate on social, political things. I talked about it an awful lot yesterday. I say this, if you want to talk about modern geopolitics, if you want to talk about all these things, if you want to get a historian's perspective from a historical perspective, give a super chat. Donate to the channel. For all the people who want to talk to me about these issues that I have more often than should have indulged, I'm drawing the line. Give a super chat to the channel, become a member. If you want more access, you can do those things anyways. But if you really want me to divulge information, I don't divulge my opinions because I believe my job is to be objective. If we get to 20,000 subscribers, I'll do a full reveal about who I am. My moderators don't know my name, my political identity, my religious affiliation. If you want to know all of those things, subscribe and help me get to 20,000. Tell all your friends and family. Check out the content, help the algorithm, all of that stuff. And if you want my opinion on these matters, then give a super chat if you want me to actually discuss them from a historical perspective, because I'm tired of discussing them just because people want to discuss them, because people are obsessed with things that they have no right being. I would love it if you became a member. I would love it if anyone became a member. Hars is a member. That's why he's got the emoji next to his name. But how did we go from authoritarianism pre-18th century to this fight between liberalism and communism? Did people really care too much about common people because they hated monarchism so much? Yes, it was the overcorrection of the French Revolution, which the interpretation and reaction to which inspires Hegel, who inspires Marx, which leads to the creation of modern communism. There are indirect ways in which this happens. Basically, it's who rules over us? Well, it doesn't make sense to have monarchs continually rule over us forever. That seems kind of out of date. So can we actually achieve total communal rule? Can we have, and that's pretty much impossible. So we'll have a party represent that. Frog, thank you for your donation. I really appreciate it. You're the best. It's great to have you here as always. And all the money that you give to this channel goes in, I use for producing great content. So let me see if I can go back and see if there's other questions. Let me see here. Didn't see the Napoleon movie. I want to go see the old one from the 70s. I was watching a good video. Do you lean more conservative or progressive? Again, I don't share my political views. I mean, it all depends on perspective. People guess all the time what my political views are. And oftentimes when people get mad at something that I say that they seem to think is me giving my political opinion, it usually when I'm just talking about history, it tells me more about what they think politically. People always want to make you in their own image. Making God in our own image is our favorite activity of reinterpreting the world and the universe beyond that through our own lens, rather than understanding our own biases. So people love to say, oh, you must be a right-wing nutjob, but perhaps I'm completely moderate, or perhaps I'm totally left-wing, and they're just so extreme in their own views. It's because they want to hear their opinions coming out of my mouth. My job is to give the facts, to tell the truth. That is the job of the historian, of the social scientist, and far too many people don't do that anymore. Foreign countries are spending billions to get Americans to hate Trump. Don't be a puppet. What? What am I a puppet of? I've been talking about Andrew Jackson and Napoleon, bro. Georgia produces better presidents than Tennessee. I'll die on this hill. Tennessee gets Jackson and Polk, who I think are two good presidents. I think Jackson is good, at least for his time being. I'll speak more about this next week. Georgia's given Jimmy Carter. Who else has Georgia given that's been a good president? I don't even think Jimmy Carter is a good president, Justin. Yes, I love the smoking jacket. It turns me into history, Hefner. Let me see. Yeah, his niece served as first lady. Or that might have been Jackson. I know James Buchanan's niece served as his first lady because he was not married. He was a bachelor. Do you think you'll ever be canceled? I understand if you consider this a political question. I've been canceled. I made a video about a certain Austrian painter on YouTube that got torn down because I said that certain Austrian painter. Hitler. God, why can't we say that? Why can't we say that anymore? And I said that Stalin is worse than Hitler. And it's completely true. And YouTube took that down. I've made videos on TikToks talking about the Nazis' rise to power, about all the bad things the Nazis did. I haven't even praised the Nazis, and I've had videos taken down. Or I had a video that what video was it taken down? Where I said that Hitler would have been given favorable terms to Great Britain, which is totally 100% factual, because my job is as a historian to discuss these things, and YouTube took it down. So I have been canceled. I don't believe in canceling others. I believe that free speech comes with danger. But any sort of freedom comes with danger. The freedom of religion comes with the ability to worship dangerous ideologies and dangerous gods. The freedom of the press comes with the ability to smear and libel people in horrible ways. The freedom of any freedom comes with danger. Any freedom comes with danger. And you know who would have said that? Napoleon and Andrew Jackson. That's a fun comparison, the two of them. Love thy neighbor after you are done taking their oil and minerals. Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you like the History Channel, Greg. It's cool that you think that. It's cool that you're here. So since Safavid Persia is not that well known, I'm curious how you learned about that period of history for the first time. I'm a historian. I'm a history chameleon. I study a particular type of history, and I get into it really quickly. So the Safavids are fascinating. It's my job to learn about it as much history as I can and to produce as much history content about all parts of the world, not just the Western parts of the world in Europe and the United States. My job is to learn about all types of history, and the Gunpowder Empires are fascinating. The Safavids are fascinating. And Hearts, can you put my video on tier ranking the U.S. presidents and the Safavids in the chat so people can go watch that afterwards? It's very rare for an American and even many Westerners to know about the East, but they need to, and it's better when we do. Why you look like Buzz Lightyear? I don't look like Buzz Lightyear, but he's very handsome, so I'll take that as a compliment. Never start a war on a noun. You will always lose. Haha, clever. Like, why would the East and Russia only just start their experimentalism of philosophies and ideologies from the Western thought and the Enlightenment during the Industrial Revolution? Because they were behind. Russia was politically, socially, and economically behind. And the repression of political freedoms in the Russian Empire during the 19th century encouraged not suppression of radical anarchistic and left-wing ideology, but the embracing of it. They didn't have more moderate forms of liberalism in Russia like they did in Great Britain, France, and the United States. They had socialism and communism as more radical options and lesser degrees of communism, like the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries going up against the Bolsheviks, who eventually won out. Also, put the link to my Russian Revolution video. You can learn about Russian history. We talk about it a lot here because I'm a Russian historian. That's actually my main field. But the real truth of the matter is Russia was behind, and so to catch up, it caught up really fast, and you have the suppression, you had the Streisand effect, but in political theory, where you basically had the suppression of any sort of political speech led to the embracing of the most radical forms of political speech, of political ideology. Do you think you'll ever get canceled? I already answered that. Why some people after Cold War thought that history ended? Because they believe that history is an argument and history is an argument, but they believe the argument had been made. Liberal democracy is correct. The post-war and post-Cold War consensus was that that free trade, capitalism, and the West got it right. And although there are many things that these systems get right, they don't get everything right. You can't put a square peg in a round hole, which is exactly what the U.S. and the Western order tried to do in the Middle East during the early 2000s, and it turned out to be an absolute disaster because people are different. Democracy is not a universal principle that works all over. It works well in Europe. It works well in the United States. It's a little more tenuous in Eastern Europe. It's hard to achieve in all places of Asia. It's almost impossible in the Middle East, and it's not popular in Africa. So different people act in different ways. People made a foolish assumption that because of this and that. It was a false conclusion. Yeah, check out the Ranking the U.S. Presidents video, the Safavids, and the Russian Revolution. Please list the 5 favorable aspects or contributions of the Soviet Union. The Soviets were the ones who created the space program. The Soviets' industrialization during the 1930s allowed them to destroy the German Wehrmacht in the war. The Soviet Union was the first country to declare gender equality between men and women. The Soviet Union is the first I don't know if you consider this positive or not, but the Soviet Union was the first, I think, nation to legalize all forms of contraception and birth control. That comes down to your opinion on these particular issues. I'm trying to think of what else the Soviet Union did. In many ways, the Soviet Union kept communist China from held back and kept the attention of communist China away from fervor terrors and heinous actions, the way the Vietnamese kept the Cambodians from doing it. Who invented underwear? Don't know. I mean, wearing pajamas, long pants, and shirts underneath your clothes is something that goes back for hundreds of years. Tunics and and things like that. Why you look like Dracula? It's the smoking jacket. Okay. What's the point of putting Russia on a pedestal? It's not about putting Russia on a pedestal. It's about studying a particular point of history. I find Russia to be, I love liminal figures. I love liminal history. Liminal, by the way, means between one era and another. Napoleon is a liminal figure. Russia is liminal. It's between Europe and Asia. It's between modern and medieval. It is behind, and yet it is on time. There's so much to find fascinating about the Russian people, their resilience, why Russia becomes the largest nation on earth, basically its own giant continent. It's really fascinating. If it sounds that way, but here it comes. Your favorite country is Russia. Does that make you sympathetic towards communism? No, the irony is I think communism is a bad idea. I've studied enough Russian history to know communism is a bad idea. Interesting, Greg. Well, you'll like the Russian history content that we have. You better not say that Easter comes from paganism. There is number one Easter, and people like to mix it up with pagan holidays like Christmas. Easter, as we know, today was for Jesus, not pagan holiday. Yes, this is why I say that Christmas and Easter are Christian holidays, but they are paganic roots in these holidays that were appropriated by the church and appropriated by late Roman society that the church found easy to use. Russia is a mystery wrapped inside enigma, inside a contradiction, something like that, that Churchill said. Most elaborate political assassination or favorite. I did a video today on TikTok. You can go check out TikTok, but it'll be here on YouTube, about the Lisbon regicide, which is such a fascinating term. But it's the death of King Carlos I in Lisbon in 1908, and we don't know about it. So that one is currently the one where my attention is. I don't think I can have a favorite assassination, but it is pretty interesting, and nobody knows about this. Do you think Nazis are the lesser of the two evils between the two extremist ideologies in World War III? And by the way, World War I is the 7 Years' War. Fight me about that. World War II is the Great War, and World War III is the War of the Nazis. I think at the time, the Nazis were far more existentially threatening than the Soviets were. But I think afterwards it became obvious that the Soviets were not really any better. Karl Marx wanted communism to start in a modern society like UK, not a backwards country like Russia. Karl Marx didn't know what he was talking about. I'm sorry, he just didn't. Every single developed mechanized nation rejected communist revolution outright. Look at the Spartacists. Easter came from the winter solstice that was adapted to mythology figures, and finally Jesus take claim for Easter. Kind of, but not really. The roots aren't from paganism. They are holidays that are just close to other pagan holidays. The historical origins has truly nothing to do with pagan holidays, maybe commercialism, not the religious. Do you know that Mithras was born on December 25th, and the Saturnalia, all of these celebrations the Romans had? I mean, Christmas was pretty pagan, but it wasn't Christmas. Karl Marx was not a real Jew. Marx was Jewish. You see, okay, I'm not going to get into the Jewish thing too much because it's crazy how things actually devolve. Marx was the son of a rabbi, but there's Jews, Judaism, and Judea. Judea or Judah or Israel is the land. Okay? It's just the land that was ruled and controlled by the ancient Hebrew people during on and off throughout the last millennium BC up until the Romans kicked them out and renamed the land in 136 AD. There are the Jews, who are the ethnic and cultural and social people, who are the ethnic people from the ancient Hebrews who lived in that region. There are different types of Jews who settled in different types, intermarried and acculturated in some ways, but not in others, to Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain, areas like that. That is Judaism. Those are the Jews. That's Jewishness. Judaism is the religion practiced to varying degrees by the Jewish community. And to become Jewish, to become a practitioner of Judaism, means you also become Jewish, which is the main why people get them confused all the time. But I hear a lot of people saying the Jews believe this. No, they don't. A Jew like Barbara Streisand, who is very Jewish, is very secular in her practice of Judaism. A Jewish Orthodox rabbi is not necessarily also happens to be he practices Judaism, but he also happens to be Jewish. But there are Haredi Jews in Israel who have no ties to the land. They live there, but they actually believe that the land doesn't belong to Israel and that Israel is a spiritual sense because of their connections to Kabbalah. Or wait, maybe that's the Hasids. I don't know. I'm not an expert in it, but that's actual. So understand the different religious branches of Judaism. You have Orthodox, conservative, secular, and Reform. And then you have the different cultural parts, Sephardim, Mizrahim, and of course the Ashkenazi. And then you have people who happen to be Jewish who have no religious affiliation, people who happen to be Jewish who have no connections to the land, people who are practitioners of Judaism who have no connections to the land either. So yeah, you got to go through all of those things. Why don't you ever study or talk about African history? Well, Neva, if you have questions about African history, I'd love to do it, talk about it. I have an entire video about how Africa was colonized. I've talked about it in Jinga of Angola. I've talked about the ancient Egyptians a lot. I've talked about Cleopatra. What do you want to know about? What do you want to talk about? I've got videos about various different leaders in African history. Mugabe, Mandela, Idi Amin, Gaddafi, Sub-Saharan and Alto-Saharan. So any chance of you wearing a toga and discussing philosophy? That would be a lot of fun. I'd love to do that. If we can get to 12,000 subscribers by the end of February, I will do that. We all have African DNA. To some extent, humanity comes from basically that region of the world. Why Europe colonized Africa and not the other way around? The depopulation of Africa due to the slave trade really weakened Africa's ability to develop resources. The fall of Africa's empires coalesced in pretty good timing with correlated in very good timing with the rise of Europe's empires that were very interested in acquisition. And the Europeans had the attitudes of social Darwinism and also the desire to Christianize these areas of the world and civilize them, believing that they were inferior racially and ethnically and civilization and civically, so that it was their job to fix them. And that's why. So it was actually a matter of timing. Can talk about Haile Selassie. I've talked about him many times. I love Haile Selassie. The Emperor of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of the few African countries that is not colonized by the Europeans in the 1800s. Selassie basically is the ruler, the Emperor of Ethiopia. He is attacked by Mussolini and the Italians in 1935. The fascists throw him out of power. He goes to the League of Nations, has the bravery to condemn it when nobody is talking about it, brings attention to the suffering of the African people. It's one of the first times chemical weapons are used in human history, and this motivates the Europeans during the last World War, or World War III, to liberate Ethiopia from the Italians and put Selassie back in charge. Selassie becomes close friends with Churchill. His heroics at saving the African people from the scourge of white imperialism makes him a hero, and not just a hero, but a messiah to the Rastafari religion of Jamaica and other places. And Selassie remains in power, being closely tied to the Europeans. Economic and political corruption and weakening issues in Ethiopia lead to a revolution in the 1970s. The communists throw him out of power, and this time he is assassinated. So he rules over Ethiopia for 40 years. But is a man of great tumult and suffering, and in many ways is seen as the Rastafari Jesus, or the second coming of Jesus. I don't know exactly if he's the first coming or second coming in Rastafari religion. What's the origins of the Amish? The Amish are a derivative of the Anabaptist group in the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. The Anabaptists were a group of people who were total pacifists, who believed in no warfare, who believed in communal living. Some of them practiced polygamy, but derivatives of Anabaptism, some of them became the basis for Baptists. Some of them, they believed in baptismal, that only believers who could express their faith should be baptized and children should not be baptized. And so they were very active in Germany in the early 1500s. Later on, derivatives of them formed in the Americas, most notably the Quakers, the Amish, and the Mennonites, the Brethren churches. These are all derivatives of Anabaptist theology, and basically the Amish are one of them that basically believe that they should be separated from the world, that the world is evil. This is a huge tenet in Anabaptism, and the Amish believe that modern technology is an example of evil. And so that's where they formed. They have large communities in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, for instance. And yes, they are Angloid. There are no modern-day Greeks. They're all just Turkish thoughts. No. The Greeks certainly wouldn't think that way. Despite the centuries of the Ottoman Empire controlling the Greeks during the 17th and 18th centuries, for instance, the Greeks were very well aware of their own national identity, which is what spurred on their revolution in the 1820s and 30s. The Greeks were very, very understanding of the difference between them and the Turks. I talked about Haile Selassie. Let's see. I'm answering questions right now. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. It's all because of the winter solstice and the rise of the sun on the 23rd, 24th, 25th, and people personify the sun. Horus of Egypt, the sun god born December 25th. Yep, there you go. So let me see here. Okay, people are arguing in the chat. That's just great. Hello back to us, back to Eden. Why when white people came to Americas, they were called colonizers, but now that brown people are coming to, they are called immigrants? Isn't that racist? This is a meme people throw out on the internet all the time, where they show no one is illegal on stolen land, and it's the immigration debate. And I don't want to have a debate, but you have like the Native American, and then people will counter that by saying, don't reject diversity to this Indian tribe, this Native American tribe. Embrace multiculturalism, which includes the Europeans destroying them. And it's the idea that the immigrants are just as bad as the Europeans were. There are categorical errors. The Native Americans did not have a immigration system. They didn't have a setup, a statute of laws A lot of them believed in communal living or in communal access to land. They did not have private property rights the same way the Europeans did. They didn't have an enshrined, hallowed idea of property, or they had nationhood, but nationhood was conglomerations of tribes working together in unison in certain areas that had similar languages and behaviors and patterns of itinerancy. So you have the Sioux Nation, the Algonquin, the Navajo. All of them are named after their language, by the way. So it's actually a very different system of settling land by Native Americans than the way America is at this time in the 20th century. There is nothing wrong, but at the same time, immigrants, whenever they go to a particular area, suffer horrible amounts of persecution and resistance, and there's often a lot of cultural clashing. And white people have been subject to this too. Irish, Italians, Jews, Poles, Russians suffered horrible discrimination when they came to the United States. It just seems to me that Hispanics and now people from the Middle East are more and more are the victims of this as areas of the West become more multicultural. Now, in Britain and France, it's a lot harder for them to make a claim of a multicultural history, so I don't like it when people say that. But to say just because a country doesn't have a history of diversity or multiculturalism doesn't mean that they are not capable of experiencing or transforming into multiculturalism or diversity. Saying that Sadiq Khan said that Christmas is about diversity, that's nonsense. But that doesn't mean that diverse people cannot celebrate or enjoy Christmas. So I'm not going to get too much into the political debate. I will say from a historical perspective, as someone who has studied immigration, America has a much better claim to be a multicultural society where you can have immigrants coming in from all over the world, and it's not as suspicious as it might be in France or Germany. How long were the Vikings in the UK? You have the Danelaw, which was set up in the 9th century. They basically had varying different kingdoms throughout the 9th and 10th and 11th centuries. And basically, when Harold Hardrada is defeated, that's seen as the end of the Viking attempts to colonize England. And when the Norse men from Normandy, which had originally been given by the French to the Norse, would conquer England under William the Conqueror, it changes the game forever. So that's why 1066 is seen as the end of the Viking Age. They had already been Christianized. Their colonization of different areas of Europe, their continual plundering of certain areas of Europe was reduced. And by the 1100s, it pretty much fallen off completely. Hello, Harry, you got here. Just to point out, most people from the West who go to these third world countries are people who are professionals or have gone to some of the most prestigious universities in the world. When did you say World War III started? It's not that I add a world war after the Nazis. It's that I believe in the two world wars of the 20th century, but I add the 7 Years' War. Harris put the link to that as the First World War. So you may not agree, but I stand by that pretty aggressively. Why are you even addressing that ignorant comment? Why are we blocking what he's saying? We are all immigrants. We are all immigrants. We are all immigrants. So don't spam over and over, and don't use all caps, never under pressure. But you are under pressure to explain to me how people are immigrants. There's a difference between settling an area and setting up a system and creating a system of naturalization and immigration, which the United States and many other countries have done. I am not saying that just because they can't, that I don't see the early American settlers or French or Spanish, as that matter, as immigrants. I see them as settlers. That doesn't necessarily make it a good thing what they did to the Native Americans. It doesn't necessarily solve the immigration questions of now. I just think that it's a silly tactic to say that the immigration system of and the way the Native Americans understood land and nation in the 15th and 16th and 17th centuries absolutely correlates to how we understand nation and immigration in the 20th and 21st centuries. I think it's a facile argument. So anyways, you can disagree, but that's what I think, and I think there's a historical argument to be made that backs me up. And if you want to talk about the politics of it, then give a super chat. Native Americans were not genocided. They died naturally by the virus. Some died by bullet, but it's not accurate to say that race was erased by bullets. Also, they killed lots of white people too. Yes, it's very true that warfare was the main reason. I don't see the Native Americans as suffering a genocide. I think what they suffered was awful. But not everything that is suffered awfully is a genocide. Hiroshima was not a genocide. It was awful. What's happening in Gaza, I'm going to mention it because you guys will probably go there anyways, is awful. It is not a genocide. Horrible things happen in terrible situations, and we don't have to use the word genocide. Is every single time a person gets killed unlawfully a genocide? I don't think so, and neither should you. I think we need proportionality. You're not a historian. Yes, the man with a bachelor's and a master's degree who has studied this all of his life and does this every week, every day I'm producing content for this channel and I'm learning about new types of history, is not a historian. your wrongfully informed opinions. Please tell me what's wrong, and I will be happy to answer it. You're an immigrant. You don't know what I am. You have no idea who I am. You are assuming certain things about me because I have white skin, which is racist. So stop being racist. And convincing him, I'm not all-knowing. I get fact-checked all the time. I think you're just a troll. Are you like 13 and you're just bored of Skibbity Riz and 6'7" and you're here just to learn something and you're bored on a Sunday afternoon? Because if you are, maybe go back and watch some of my videos because you can learn something and you can actually become informed. So have fun with that. Do you think it would have been beneficial for the UK to stay out of World War II? The channel World War II, not calling World War II. Okay, so the Great War. Yeah, what's fascinating is the British have two choices that probably change world history in the 20th century that nobody talks about. They do not have an alliance with France and Russia in 1914 that obligates them to fight against the Kaiser when the war starts. They actually could stay out of the war. And there's a lot of German Anglophiles and Anglo-Germophiles. That sounds like you love Germans, but there's a lot of mutual love and respect between Germany and England. They have similar histories. They've been allies at many different points throughout it. They have a similar culture and language. And of course, they have similar religious backgrounds. But so there's a lot of animosity between England and France in their long history. Just ask Napoleon, who literally tried to shut down an entire continent from trading with the English and the British in the 19th century. But really, the French and the English have had a lot of problems. The British are worried about the acquisitive and imperialistic notions of a Kaiser, the way he kind of tries to manipulate everything for German advantage with no tact and no diplomacy like Otto von Bismarck had. The British are leery of him. But the British could have chosen to stay out of both world wars. A lot of you know about the Never Surrender story, Churchill standing up to Hitler. It's an incredible thing. It's amazing. People like John Doyle don't know, or is it Doyle, whatever his name is? Jerry Doyle, whatever his name is, don't know anything about it. But people that do know, people that do know that story know how incredible it actually is. That shouldn't necessarily be talked about. What Harry, who is a Brit, is asking is about, and by the way, thanks to Harry and Hars and all my moderators who do such a great job for the channel, they're asking about the British decision to join the Great War, the war to end all wars, what you call World War I, what I believe is World War II. In 1914. The British do not have a mutual defense pact with the French. When the French are attacked or when the Russians are attacked, they don't have to defend them. The British have spent most of the 19th century basically not being European, basically allowing the Europeans to do whatever they want while building their own massive international empire that now spans all of the continents except Antarctica. So the British can join or not join. But when Belgian neutrality is violated and the Kaiser sends his troops around, I think it convinces the British that basically the Germans will stop at nothing to brutalize their enemies, and this is inane, and this is dangerous to the international order, to the peace of Europe, and so they need to get involved. So it would have been interesting. The war probably wouldn't have lasted that long. I think the Germans would have beat the French very quickly. A lot of people think that the Great War ended well. I do think that it's better that the Allies, France, Britain, and the United States won that war. But look at the results of that war. It's pretty devastating, especially when we consider what happens later. Now, you don't know any of this, but when we look at hindsight, the Russian Empire collapses and the Soviet Union takes over. And the Tsar was far from good, but the Soviets do horrible, horrible things. You have a Cold War, but on top of that, you have the horrible human rights abuses and tens of millions of people dying. You have the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which creates the total kerfufflement nonsense in the Middle East, basically by Britain and France playing kingmaker in that area. You have the collapse of the German Empire, which of course does not directly lead to the rise of the Nazis, but the lamentation of German loss will eventually influence the Nazis. So is it better that the Kaiser is in power and beats the French and the Russians and kind of gets to do what he wants, and you don't have a rise of a Nazi party? You don't have communism in Russia? I don't know. You don't have the United States becoming the international policeman, which can be a good or a bad thing. So a lot changes if the Germans win that war, if that war only lasts until Christmas, like they thought it would, like they believed this war would be over quickly. It would be simple and quick and easy. Part of their propaganda to make war glorified was that this is an easy war. We'll be home by Christmas. In Christmas, they were playing soccer on the trenches, by the way. It's a fascinating story. So this is a white supremacist ideology channel. I love this. I love being called a white supremacist. I love just stultifying ignorance. Yeah. So why did China not explore more in ancient times? China explored a lot. I mean, you look at the treasure fleets, you look at the Silk Road. China was usually a recipient of foreign exploration in the ancient and medieval period, but in the early modern period, the Chinese were actually ahead in terms of using seafaring trade and exploration, exacting tribute from different areas. If they hadn't stopped in 1433, the treasure fleets probably would have made it all the way to the Americas. What's your day job? Don't share it. Why they call it Great War? It was not great, it was horrible. Well, great as in massive. And I call it the Great War only so that I can, because when I say World War II, everyone starts thinking of Nazis and the Imperial Japanese. So I'm Native Alaskan and so glad this land was founded by the United States. Alaska was Russian America before then, and of course belonged to the many different Inuit peoples before then. Let's see. Do we need a one world government for world peace? I don't know. It's a bold notion. Supranationalism seems to be coming undone. People seem to be less and less interested in it now than they used to be. So for me, it doesn't seem like that's an easy thing to achieve. What's better, Stonehenge? What's better, or World War II? What's more interesting? A war that lasts for 4 years versus a collection of rocks? The war. But the mysteries around Stonehenge are quite interesting. Let me see. Personally, I think it would have been a better idea to take the reputational damage of not intervening because of our treaty obligations to Belgium and stay out of the war, which means London could have remained the financial center of the world and the British Empire would have been put under serious strain or financial difficulty, and the Kaiser 4 years wanted an Anglo-German axis to basically dominate the world. Yes, the Germans constantly tried to give the British good terms during the 20th century. Would I ever happen? Oh, I'd rather just have Stonehenge happen than a war if it kills millions of people. You didn't ask that, Abe. All the movies and shows that show Native American genocide are anti-white propaganda. I mean, I get why people feel this way. I really do. I just don't believe it's true. I believe it's an inaccurate description. I think that we're describing the same thing using different terms, and I think the term you're using when you say genocide of Native Americans is an incorrect definition. What's your thought on China's new road, the Belt Road? Well, that's their, you got BRICS, you have China's investment in Africa. Basically, Africa is very leery of investment in post-colonial relations with the French and the British, and for good reason. And because of that, they're more sympathetic to the influence of East Asia. And before the Soviet Union tried to do it, they really never were successful at it. The Chinese have been more successful. What term would you use instead of genocide? Conquest. The Native Americans were conquered. And when you're conquered, you lose land, you lose people, you lose the place you live in, and you are forced to live in different areas. That's exactly what happened to the Native Americans. It's not a good thing. I'm not happy about it, but I think it's fair. Do you think the Kensington Stone is authentic? What's the Kensington Stone? Just wondering what your day job was, not asking where you work. I'm an educator. I'll be that specific. I don't like to get into detail. I just don't like to share a lot about myself personally. My job is to deliver historical information to you guys. So I serve in a liminal position. Okay, we are at 90 minutes. We've got another half hour of Q&A, so please line up questions, topics, comments, things you want to discuss about history and social sciences. Please put them in the chat, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll be going until about 5 o'clock. What is the history of Sudan, and why was there a recent civil war that split the country into North and South? The Europeans, when they colonized Africa and divide it up, the British are the ones that take Sudan. But they basically kind of do it very arbitrarily, and you've got different areas that have like different, different tribes and different regions that don't always get along. And because of this, when these areas are decolonized, you have fighting between the tribes, you have power vacuums, and you basically have a constant push for authority, and one tribe will abuse the other tribe. This is common, and that's the case in Darfur, that's the case in North and South Sudan, that's the case in the recent war in Sudan itself. Yeah, it's just kind of part and parcel of what happens in that area of the world. Because and after colonization. And Sudan is obviously, was the ancient land of Kush and Nubia that once conquered Egypt, was conquered by the Egyptians. The Sudanese fought very hard to withstand British colonization. You have Khartoum in 1885 because of this. Most of the Native Americans died naturally, but there were many wars and conquest. You also have depopulation and a decent amount of evidence for ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is not genocide. It is a feature of genocide, but it is not genocide. Just because ethnic cleansing happens doesn't mean genocide is happening. Do you think the Belt and Road scheme is happening because everyone now wants to be able to wear the fancy robes they got from the Silk Road, but they're all realized they're too wide at the hip? Hilarious, but no. When North America was colonized, at least 50% of North American population was already wiped out by the virus. True. Why are white people able to have more technology? Technology is what allowed the Europeans to colonize and to oppress and imperialize at such a great rate compared to the Eastern Asians, the Africans, the Latin American natives, or any of our people. What allowed them to do it was technology. It's that simple. And I think you have technological developments, you have the Renaissance, you have a scientific revolution, you have timing and technology working well, the two T's. Minerals in Africa. Yep, you mentioned Rhodesia yesterday. How did white rule come to an end? Decolonization efforts, national congresses that split into different groups, and eventually you have the formation of Zimbabwe from that and Robert Mugabe. Basically, they didn't want to be named after a colonizer and an imperialist like Cecil Rhodes. Do you know much about the London Stone? I pass it. Hilarious. If you're passing London stones all the time, you have kidney disease and need to see a urologist. Why are white people responsible for most medical and intentional technology? Again, the scientific revolution, the timing, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, who could have probably come up with a lot of these inventions. You see the decline of empires in Asia. You see the shutting off of Japan with the Tokugawa shogunate, the Ming dynasty kind of turning to its own insular, and then being conquered by Manchus and the rise of the Qing dynasty. You basically have empires starting to falter in the 17th and 18th centuries in Asia and the Middle East, which could have been very capable of these types of colonization and technological developments, while the Europeans were hitting their stride. They're hitting their stride in technology related to discovery. You have better, faster ships. You have strides in economic theory. You have an invention, you have the Industrial Revolution, the revolutions in the textile industry in Great Britain. You have the development of capitalism. You also have, so you have technological, you have scientific discoveries that are obviously huge for the understanding of the world. You have geographic discoveries that are understanding for how the world works and how big the world actually is, such as Columbus's miscalculation with thinking he was in India. So that I think is a huge part of it. I think it's timing. You have the timing of the fall of certain empires and the rise of others. Whatever today we have, white genocide in the West, I am here as a brown man. I don't stand with white genocide. I don't think white genocide is happening. I think that's also a misuse of the terminology. You have a decline in the birth rates of native populations of many areas of the world. Africa is the only continent that is seeing growth. But China, Korea, Japan, and I mean South Korea, not just North Korea, are all seeing tremendous birth rate declines. But then you look at the Angloid world, it's happening in Canada, Australia, Great Britain, and the United States. It's happening in France and Germany. It's happening all over the place. Latin America is suffering with it too. And people believe that immigration is a way that you plug up the holes of population decline because you'll have labor shortages and things like this. But the truth of the matter is, it's a zero-sum game. You're losing areas are losing people from migration, and other areas are gaining people from migration. But it is a replacement. But it's not white genocide. It's just the demographic shift because of immigration and low birth rates of native populations. Low birth rates, by the way, are always a sign of civilizational and imperial collapse. Look at the Romans. The Romans filled their countries with barbarians. And I am not making a political statement about immigration, but the reason they did that was because of low birth rates of their own people, which led to societal collapse. So it's not a good thing that places like China and France and the United States have low birth rates, or Argentina for that matter. And I named 4 different countries and 4 different continents. It has nothing to do with white people. It has nothing to do with a white genocide. There is no white genocide. In South Africa, when they said, farmers are being persecuted, it's white genocide. No, it's not white genocide. It is an attempt by the government to stamp out people that they believe are overly privileged. Can you tell me about the effects of the Spanish flu? Did it also affect soldiers on the Western Front? It probably started in the Western Front, probably started in the trenches where sanitation and safety were not a primary concern when you're fighting a war. The reason it's called the Spanish flu is because it was first reported upon in Spain, where censorship laws were not that strict and where media attention wasn't all about the war. Do you think James Polk was trying during his presidency to support the South in different ways? Sure. I see. I thought you meant like a kidney stone or a turd. I'm sorry. But yes, The London Stone, outside of Cannon Street Station. Well, I have to go to London. BC. I don't use BCE and CE, and here's why. It has nothing to do with religion. I use BC and AD only because BCE and CE are literally based on the same years of Jesus of Nazareth and his birth. It's just a BS way to replace old terminology just because you want to be politically correct, but it's a weak attempt. Who discovered Australia first? Was there European settlement before the British? The Dutch discovered it first, but they never had permanent settlement. Cook is the one who establishes permanent settlement there, or the British do. It might not be Cook. There was a systematic effort and very clear one to replace white people in the West. I don't think Jews are doing it. I think radical left is doing it and blaming it on Jews. I don't think the Jews have anything to do with it, and I think Jews in the West are considered to be white anyways. So, anyways, I've caught up to the chat. That's rare. Usually I'm way behind. I'm not able to answer things, but we've been staying on top of things. We had a wonderful live stream lecture earlier on Andrew Jackson. I'm going to need to charge my phone in a minute, so I'm going to be moving around the studio a little bit. But please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to continue to answer questions. We've got about another 20 minutes or so of Q&A. Hopefully you're enjoying the friendly history that we are doing. So yeah, that is completely insane. Well, if you want to send me something, you can join our Discord. Hars, put the link to the Discord so that people can join it and they can actually chat with me and chat with my moderators and have further discussions about history and social studies. There's a nut job conspiracy theory known as the replacement theory, which was made up by some whack job. Yes, ad hominems. That's how you defeat an argument. Many groups with no hatred for their culture conquered cities, killed the men and enslaved the females and young people. Genocide. It's not genocide. Okay, so please follow us on Discord and what was it? How do you say your name? The New Era. The New Era, you can send me that picture. You made the religious leaders look bad, or you can email me if you want a further conversation, friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com. Read my Substack. You can also check out Patreon for extra stuff. And, of course, we also have TikTok. Hars, can you put the link to TikTok where we've got plenty of stuff that's not here on YouTube? He made the religious leaders look bad, so they got offended and then killed him. Who are you referring to? White people are the most, Greg is saying, Europe is a mess. It's crazy what's happening. Greg, are you European? White people are the most oppressed people. They are the only people who are being genocided and stereotyped. That's just alt-right nonsense, in my opinion. Again, I don't want to talk about the politics of it too much. It is perfectly possible for white people to be oppressed and mistreated. It is not. I'm not one of those people who thinks that it's not possible just because white people have had such a dominant history, nor do I believe that just because one group has had a dominant history, the other group deserves to mistreat them for whatever reason. So yeah. Jesus. Oh, yeah, Jesus. In your opinion, how badly did Italian operations in the Balkans screw Germany regarding Barbarossa? Germany is consistently having to bail out the Italians during that war, during both world wars. Well, the last World War, and the Germans, and they bail out the Austro-Hungarians in the Second World War. They bail out the Nazis in the next World War. Oh my God, Greg, America is a bigger asshole at the moment than Europe probably will ever be in the future. Yes, I love this. America sucks because I love this attitude of zero sum. Someone has to suck so that someone else can be great. Why can't we all just be great? Again, no pun intended. Let me see. I'm Irish. I don't really see myself as European. That's fair. And are you in Ireland, Greg? Because the Irish are also having their issues with this. And I'm not going to say that they're not issues. There are definitely some problems with immigration. But it's not because of the immigrants necessarily, and it's not because of nativism. Immigration, remigration, cultural conflict and clash is hard. It's going to happen. Yeah. Oh, you're in Dublin. Wow. Beautiful city. I love Ireland. I would love to go to Ireland. I need to go to the UK. I need to go to the Isles. I need to spend a lot of time doing friendly neighborhood history stuff in England with Harry and with Simon the Bunny. And Simon, if you're watching this, we miss you. But anyways, longtime moderator of a channel who we haven't seen. Simon doesn't even know my name, by the way. So if you wonder what my name is, where I'm from, the U.S. is the best you're going to get, my friend. And I use Eastern Standard Time. But does that mean I'm on the East Coast? Don't know. Who cares? Moving on. Anyways, so the Ireland and Great Britain and Scotland, well, Scotland's part of Great Britain, the English, the Angloid nations of the British Isles have been able for a long time to disassociate themselves from being European. The Irish in particular. The Irish did not fight in the last World War. Why did the U.S. not invest into Iraq and Afghanistan like they did with Germany and Japan? They weren't worried. Well, they did invest in there. They did. They were much more interested in political investment than economic one. They knew that they were lining up against the Soviets. It was a little bit of a different standard by the time you get to in the 1940s. There was different priorities. One was cutting off access to communist revolutions and what the causes of them. The other was exporting democracy in order to rebuild these societies. They did do economic investment in those areas. Look, I don't want to be far right, but the social media prompts this idea that Iranians should be far right, and I tried so much to resist, but I'm tired. I embrace it now. You do you. We've got it down to the free states, California, Washington, and Oregon, but that's about as far as we've got. How do you have any idea that I'm in any of those states? Why those states? There's no evidence that I'm in any of those states. Beautiful states, to be sure. Why did the Axis powers expand into North Africa during the war? Italy wanted Ethiopia. It had always tried to colonize it, and the Germans kind of just followed them. They also wanted to attack British colonies in that area. That was Osama bin Laden's whole deal. They were interesting by staging coups and funding civil wars. That's true. Mujahideen. He had been a rebel by the Americans. America is very good at turning an ally into a boogeyman. Ask Stalin, ask Mao. Do you think radicals are being let into Europe through immigration? Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. I think that there's cultural conflict and there's cultural clash. I think the civilizations of areas like Pakistan and Syria are completely incompatible in many, many ways with the way they are now with Europe in a sense of a traditional Europe. So either you have a different Europe, you have a modified Europe, or you don't have Europe at all. Or you have remigration, which is even more dangerous. Or could be. Who knows? Struggling to get on the Discord link. Put the link in the chat again, please, Hars. I think you are Ohio and Michigan. Also great states. What civilization built the small pyramids of the Sudan? Kush and Nubia, they were called. The Nubians. He has shown several videos in the live stream months and months away from each other where we met were palm trees. He was at an ICE protest when he got harassed by protesters in Los Angeles. I was not in Los Angeles. I was not harassed by ICE protesters. That's not true. You can watch the video. I was at a rally, or I was walking, was I at a counter rally? Who knows what I actually think about this stuff. I was going by a Tesla dealership, and there were a bunch of people outside the Tesla dealership protesting against Elon Musk and calling him a Nazi and a fascist. And I interacted with a few of them and asked them just real fast, do you know what Nazism actually is? How is a South African guy a Nazi? It's these idiots, I'm sorry, but it is idiotic to me, who say, I saw one woman, maybe it might have been even a joke, but she said, I would never own a car, buy a car owned by a Nazi, or own a car made by the Nazis. I gave up my Tesla and I got a Volkswagen, the people's car, the Volkswagen, that was literally personally designed by Hitler. Some of these people are just stupid. I'm sorry, but they're just stupid. And they're stupid on the left and they're stupid on the right, and they are used by powerful people to ruin us. And one of their biggest evidences of their idiocy is their lack of knowledge about history and social sciences. And that's why I'm here doing what I am, to educate and help people. Because it's going to help all of us. If idiots stop being idiots, everybody gets helped. So, I'm walking around and I'm seeing these people with these signs, and I'm just curious, does anyone know what a Nazi is? Because I don't think that the United States is being run by Nazis right now. I just don't. I think that's just rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything. And I think people who use it don't know what a Nazi actually is. I'm crossing the street, and there's this guy, and he looks at me and he says, he has a sign, he says, "Stop fascism." And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to stop fascism. Fascism is evil. Nazism is evil. I hate these things. But I actually know why I hate them. I don't just hate them because CNN tells me to hate them. Or PBS tells me to hate them. Because far right. What does that mean? Nazism and fascism were not historically far right. They were created by socialists on the far left. They have right-wing elements to them, but they are not purely left-wing. I don't even know I think that they're horseshoe theory. They prove horseshoe theory. Mussolini was a socialist. The guy who invented fascism, who was not Mussolini, was another Italian philosopher, communist. They just took it and basically said, it's not going to work universally. It'll just work in one country if we take all the cultural apparatuses and overpower them. That's what the Nazis did. That's why you get traditional values that seem like right-wing stuff mixed with authoritarian government, command economies, all of this stuff. It's usually communistic. So I just asked this guy, I hate fascism too. Nice sign. And he's like, oh, yeah, yeah, great. And he's this boomer guy. I'm sorry, but it just seems like white liberal boomers just all kind of act the same these days. And I say, what is fascism? And I'm expecting this man in his 60s to explain to me, a young guy, oh, fascism, we fought a war against the fascists, and Mussolini was a fascist, and fascists hate democracy, and fascists hate freedom, and Donald Trump is a fascist, and here's why. And maybe he was just stupid, or his daughter asked him to do it, or he said, they're like a Nazi. And I'm like, okay, what's a Nazi? And at this point, it's clear that I'm trolling him a little bit. And he just says, and the girl next to him just starts laughing her head off because she knows what I'm doing. And he's like, probably you. You're probably a Nazi. I just threw up my hands and I just said, yes, clearly asking questions, critical thinking makes me a Nazi. Nazis are not critical thinkers. Nazis have never been critical thinkers. Nazis rely on people like him, not like people like me. Just stultifyingly stupid because you hate Doge and you hate Trump and you hate Musk. Okay, go ahead and hate them. Does that make everybody I hate is Hitler? It's the Homer meme. It's everybody's stupid but me. And so this moron crosses the street and I cross the other street and I start talking to a couple people and they said, did that guy just call you a Nazi? And I'm like, yeah. And they said, are you a Nazi? And I'm like, I'm a historian. I hate Nazis. Nazis are bad. What's the Jordan Peterson line? What do you think about Nazis? I don't like Nazis. Duh. Who's actually going around? Okay, never mind. Sorry. Far right morons aside, because they're just as stupid and ignorant. And I just said, if we lived in a fascist society, these people would not be in the streets protesting. And if they were, there would be a bunch of people from the regime dressed in uniforms beating the crap out of them. That's fascism. That's brown shirts. That's black shirts. That's Mussolini. That's Hitler. That's Pinochet. That's Perón. They don't know any of this because they don't study history because they haven't liked and subscribed. So you should like and subscribe. That story was totally free of charge. I hope you enjoyed it. So, anyways, I got to catch up to the chat, and I have to charge my phone, so give me just 1 minute. We are not going anywhere. We got another 15 minutes or so. So, yes. Hold on 1 second. Okay, let's see here. Let's get this in the right angle. Okay. All right, we are back. Let me fix my shades here. Okay. All right, so anyways, we're back. I'm charging my phone. I don't have a microphone, so anyways. Other questions about history or social studies. Now that you all know what a fascist I am. Let me see here. Excuse me. Yeah, what's a Nazi? Probably you is the craziest company. It's just, you are supposed to know this. You're supposed to be telling me about this. Your parents probably fought in the war or lived through the war, and you don't know what a Nazi is. You just do whatever they tell you to do. Yeah, Rommel basically ran South Africa for the Axis. Yeah, and he did a pretty good job until Patton showed up, who just used his book and his own tactics against him. All you do is read from ChatGPT. That's actually not true. The car was not designed by Hitler. Actually, I don't read from ChatGPT. Like, I literally love how you say that while I'm reading a story. The Nazis designed the Volkswagen. The BMW used their wings for the Luftwaffe were designed by the Nazis. By the BMW. Hitler designed the model for the Beetle, and was extremely influential in the development of Volkswagen. Volkswagen, the people's car. Doesn't that sound kind of authoritarian to you? Okay. Anyways, it's Tracy. Okay, Tracy, the one who thinks that I'm a genocidal maniac. What are the top historic events of the 1990s? Fall of the Soviet Union, Britain giving up Hong Kong, the return of a Stone of Scone, I was born. Yeah, those are some things. There are more anti-right protesters by people above the age of 30 than young Zoomers below the age of 30. There's plenty of people below the age of 30 who are clearly on the left and clearly on the right. It's crazy. It's nationalism of the worst kind. Patriotism are basically nationalist capitalists, kind of, I guess. Is Corn Plum here? I don't know. Matthews, Horseshoes. You say you don't think it's being run by Nazis, but do you think they desire to become fascists? No. I think that it's gotten so out of hand, and I think this is exactly what Donald Trump wants. He wants people to think that he is a Nazi. He wants that because that is red meat he can throw out to his base and tell them, hey, look at how they persecute me. I'm clearly not a Nazi. I'm clearly not insane. They're the ones that are insane. It's all a game. And the opponents fall into the trap. All the time. All the time. Without exception. Let me see. Let me move this over. Maybe. Oh, there. That's better for the lighting. Okay. So, anyways, where was I? Yeah, people fall for it. And he uses that to make it say, well, I'm not a Nazi. I'm not that bad. And just to create sympathy for himself. Stop doing it. Stop giving him that sympathy. That protest was not in Los Angeles. How would you rate Prussian Field Marshal Helmut von Moltke? Don't know enough about him specifically to rank him. Other than impressment, what were the other factors that led to the war? What war? The War of 1812? Britain and France's continual domination and stealing of American ships and cargo. That's basically the main reason. Continual pressures by American mercantile interests to side with the British versus continual efforts by the Democratic Republicans and war hawks in Congress to side with the French. This has been an ongoing political debate for 20 years if you're referring to the War of 1812, which I think you are. Why is it okay to call Africans black but not call Asians yellow? Interesting question. I don't know. I just don't know. So, talking fast doesn't make you sound smart, fancy boy. Well, unfortunately, I am both smart and talk fast. So, it doesn't make me sound smart, but it doesn't hurt. Let me see. Why you try to be Tristan Tate? Who's Tristan Tate? Did you know fascists support Palestine? Fascists hate Jews and genocided them. So whoever supports Palestine or even two-state solution is fascist. Okay, now you're just going with political nonsense. It is true that the Nazis were very, very interested in killing all of the Jews in Israel or in the Mandate of Palestine. So, anyways, what's wrong with sympathy with Trump? I'm not in the business of talking politics. I'm really not. I brought this up only in the historical context to show that nobody knows about fascism anymore. Have you received your 90-day unchecked APAC funding? No, I haven't. I'm getting kind of jealous of them. Getting tired. Yeah, people get jealous of hot and smart people all the time. Yep. Friendly history. Have you ever tried to give a big speech? Do you mind telling that story? Big speech. Oh, yeah. I've done recitations when I was in school of famous historical speeches. I gave a speech at my graduation. Yeah. Are there any examples of a two-state solution working? Pakistan and India are tenuous, with an asterisk. Why were the Prussians so militaristic? It's how they got German unification. It's what Brandenburg Prussia, which is what Prussia originally was, is surrounded by the Poles, the Swedes, the Russians, and the Austrians. They basically have to carve out a niche for survival during the times of the Fredericks. So obviously the best example of this is Frederick the Great. So the only way that they actually survive is by being hyper-militaristic. No, I'm not telling you one of the speeches. Why were the Prussians, I already answered that. The Jews were taking advantage of Germany. The meme of the guy with his thumb up, it's just ridiculous. Black African Americans are umbrella terms because many black people in America were brought over as slaves. I think it's also how long it is. Yeah, yellow has a really particularly racial bias connotation with it. But it also probably is the fact that African American is harder and takes longer to say than Asian American. I'm just being 100% serious. I hate Mamdani because he reminds me of the Ayatollah of Iran, who I grew up under his tyranny. I am also 60% sure he has some connection to Iranian regime. Mamdani is not like the Ayatollah. He's far more of a communist than he is a radical Muslim. Why do maybe demagoguery, but I don't know. Why do the Poles stay there? They seem to always get marched over. That's not always true. In the 17th century, the Poles almost conquered Russia. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth saved Europe, or at least saved the Austrians, from continual attacks by the Ottomans. The Poles were pretty overpowered. Empires come, empires go. Countries have their period of dominance and their period of retreat and stagnation. Yeah. Okay, so we're almost done. Does anyone have any other questions about history or social studies? Why does Pakistan and India hate each other? You have a division of land that was once together, and you have Kashmir and other buffer states that they would both like to control. You have the division. It's not an ethnic division. It's much more religious. It's much more the Muslims in Pakistan, the Hindus in India hating each other, and Islam's troubled history in India. Did you say you think Trump isn't a fascist? No, I don't think Trump is a fascist. I think he's if he's a fascist, Andrew Jackson's a fascist. If he's a fascist, FDR was a fascist. Presidents act like Trump do all the time. What is your favorite battle in history? Mine is the Battle of Lutzen. Good question. Alesia, the Siege of Alesia by Caesar is definitely up there. I love Yorktown. If I'm talking about Napoleon, I'm going to go with Austerlitz. If I'm looking at Russian history, Borodino I think is huge. Stalingrad's really fascinating to study. Gaugamela, just going with some of the classics. I'm trying to think of a good one in East Asian history or Indian history. There was one that was particularly influential when the Mughal defeated the Safavids. I'm trying to remember what it was called. There are a lot. Okay. Iran, any thoughts on what's happening? I mean, I'll take a super chat to talk more about the geopolitics there. I'm not going to get into it too much. We'll see if it goes anywhere. Okay, yeah, you can have whatever opinions you want about Mamdani. No, I didn't shut up about those two things, Horace. I'm just sick and tired of giving you the exact same answer and you not being happy with it, so you have to keep coming up with bad arguments. So I'm done with it. Why does Trump's appointment of Kevin Warsh stabilize the U.S. dollar? Gold and silver are following. I don't know. I don't know who Kevin Warsh is. What's the origin of the phrase crossing the Rubicon? Alia iacta est. The die is cast. Caesar supposedly said this when crossing the Rubicon. It means making a decision that you can't come back from, making a definitive, decisive action. Basically, the way it works is Caesar was told to give up his army. He refused to do it. He was clearly being targeted for political assassination, if not personal assassination. And so the Senate had clearly allied with Pompey in an effort to destroy Caesar. Caesar realized that he would have to fight a war against his friend in the Senate. It would be better to have an army than to not. If he crossed the Rubicon into Italy, he would officially be declaring war on Rome. So he started the Civil War by crossing the Rubicon. Yeah, America's leadership is famously bad. How can you say Trump isn't fascist when a U.S. city is being occupied by its ICE militia? Because that's not happening. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm saying that I don't agree with the labels. Thoughts on Project 2025? Also, you say social studies, but doesn't that include current events? Social studies can include current events, but I prefer it not to. History, geography, religion, geopolitics of the past, things of that nature tend to be. Social sciences is more politics, political science, modern politics, stuff like that. Do you like butter chicken? Who doesn't? Do you know the history of butter chicken? Like the Indian dish butter chicken? What happened is I gave you a rebuttal and you never went to change anything about your POV in regards to that. What I just rebutted, in other words, you ignore my POV. Okay, whatever you need to say to sleep at night. All right, you lost me, champ. Yeah, you disagree. I love this. You disagree with something I say that's not even political. I just make a point, and you just, oh my God, everything he said about history is totally discardable now. Happy Sunday, Daniel. History guys who learn nothing from the past are so tiring. Tell me about it. You even brought your statement so low that when we spoke about Woodrow Wilson, you acknowledged how much he had never helped in World War I and made it worse, but you still want to give him credit for being the president during it. Yes, the United States won a world war when he was president. He deserves some credit for that. Sorry. What is scientific? There is a science process of social science. There is a science of studying things, looking at results, guessing what's going to happen, and using hindsight to analyze the results. You can apply the scientific method to historical events. Rate my name out of 10, please. A 1. You are not a bozo. Look, Trump wants to liberate my country, okay? So if you don't stand with him, you stand with Ayatollah. Yes. If you don't agree with me, you're my enemy. Like I explained to you how I view this happening, and you can't even respond in a respectful way. Yeah, I don't agree. I respond very respectfully. I'm just not going to continually go over this over and over and over again with you. You're seriously saying that the mayor of New York is a fascist. Some people have a lot of catching up to do. Fascism and communism were not historically that separate. Just saying. Being president during a war while ruining the chances of winning. He didn't ruin the chances of them winning it. Clearly he didn't, because they won the war. Duh! So, can you offer for my... No, I cannot. Teach me about Abraham Lincoln. Teacher? I'm not a teacher, but okay. Abraham Lincoln, 16th president of the United States, freed the slaves. Didn't intend to originally free the slaves, wanted a lot of them to go back to Africa, but eventually became of a mind that they could stay in America and and slavery could be abolished. Managed the country through its darkest hour. Does this man even need an introduction? Isn't the current mess in Iran the fault of the U.S. and UK? Not fully. It's the fault. It might be. If you want to go in an indirect way and talk about Mohammed Mossadegh and Jimmy Carter, you could say that. Trump and Israel want a regime change in Iran so Israel can be a hegemony in the Middle East. Yes, clearly that's what's happening. Except that's not what's happening. Wait, you are wrong. Never mind. Do you include social democracy into socialism? Not quite. You originally said Wilson had won the war. He helped us with A, B, and C. He just held the title, so he just deserves credit for that. And I remember with great thought you agreeing that he didn't help the U.S., and now you say you don't. Your statements are inconsistent over time, and you change it. Then don't be my moderator. Why do you fight with me all the time? Why are you so hung up on this? I don't agree. Get over it. Get over yourself. So, anyways, I'm going to wrap it up because my moderators have just decided that they don't care about the fact that they are supposed to be helping me rather than, trying to prove their own points, which I've argued about. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be mad. I have argued about this with them so much, and I don't agree with them. I'm sorry. It's not inconsistent. I've been completely consistent on all of this. Woodrow Wilson deserves credit for winning a world war. I think that's true. Woodrow Wilson deserves credit for trying to create a new world order out of that. That's also true. All of that is true. And yet we have to constantly hate the guy. I don't love Woodrow Wilson. And I know a lot of historians who think Woodrow Wilson is the bee's knees. He's not. But I don't hate him enough. And I have to change my opinion. I have to change my opinion. No! I'm not doing it. Yeah. Woodrow Wilson. I never said that Woodrow Wilson was excellent in managing the country during the war. He put Pershing in charge. I think that's good enough. The United States won the war. You cannot tell me that between 1914 and 1917, the Woodrow Wilson and the U.S. administration were helping in any way with World War I. No, they weren't, because they weren't involved in the war. Duh. I mean, this is sickening. Why do I have to be assailed about this all the time? I've talked about this nonsensically and endlessly. I don't agree. Here's why I don't agree. No, you can't disagree with my point. If you would just accept my point, my logic is flawless. You're the most inconsistent person. You want to acknowledge how negative his policies were, but still he won the war. You give his policies credit even though they were bad. No, it's not inconsistency. It's called nuance. 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 I can acknowledge good things somebody does. I can acknowledge bad things someone does. I don't have to die on a hill.
That might be the biggest separation between me, my moderators, me and the rest of the internet, me and that idiot that yelled at me about fascism. I don't have to die on a hill. I don't have hills that I die on. So, yeah. He dragged his feet with appointing Pershing. Who appointed Pershing? Who put Pershing, the best military officer in the country, in charge? And I don't think the chances were hurt that much because guess what? We won the war. Guess who was invited to reestablish a new world order? Wilson. And if the League of Nations had worked, there probably wouldn't have been another world war. And if Wilson had gotten what he wanted out of the League of Nations, namely the U.S. joining it, then they wouldn't have been another world war probably. Wilson was right about several important key factors. He was instrumental in the U.S. joining the war, which was instrumental in helping the Allies win the war, and was instrumental in rebuilding the system after the war. I don't know why this is so hard. And it's actually when the Europeans don't listen to Wilson that things get worse. The war debt issue to Germany. Wilson is the one who said, don't treat Germany as bad as you want to. And Clemenceau and Lloyd George ignored him. I have talked about this ad nauseum. Woodrow Wilson was a racist. Everyone basically back then was a racist, but Wilson was a ridiculously nasty racist. His economic policies did not help. Wilson's presidency was a mixed bag. He lied to the American people. He covered up his own physical lack of health and basically became a shell of his former self. There's a lot to dislike about Woodrow Wilson, but I'm not going to say every single thing about him is bad, because not every single thing about him is bad. There are good things and there are bad things. I'm sorry. That's what a C-tier president gets. I put Woodrow Wilson in the C-tier. If I had to redo that video right now, thanks to Hars, who has argued me into a couple of these points, that Wilson wasn't as great as even I used to think he was. Yes, Wilson is a C-tier president. C means average, means good and bad. Get over it. I've done an entire live stream lecture on this, and you won't let it go. No, Wilson was against the war debts. You are wrong. Wilson was against heavy war debts and the war guilt clause. No, I'm not saying that for God's sakes. I'm saying putting Pershing in charge of the army was the right choice. He made it too late, but he made the right choice. Nuance. And why can't we just leave it alone? Yeah. Except the fact, Harry, that it was the Americans who actually helped the Germans with their war debt. The British didn't do anything to help the Americans with the Germans with their war debt. So, yeah. I just don't get it anymore. I do find it entertaining you battling with your mods. I'm sick of it. I'm absolutely sick of it. Their job is to help me. They don't help me. They don't help me when they do this. They're just obsessed with, I have to be right. I have to be right. This channel is about me. Well, go form your own damn channel. Talk about Woodrow Wilson all you want there. I'm sorry that the Americans didn't help you. They helped the Germans a lot. Have you heard of a Dawes plan? Do you know what stabilized Germany? This is why when people say, what's the Nazi line? Oh, the Treaty of Versailles is why the next World War. That's a Nazi lie. The Americans kept the Germans from economic collapse in the 1920s, not the British. Yes, that's fine. Yes, I'm not saying the British never did anything good. For God's sakes. Ugh. Your country refused a debt write down. I don't care about my country. This isn't about my country. This is about history. The Article 231 of the treaty he wanted. Look at what Article 231 was. He wanted most of them to not have a debt much for the peace without victory, so he can have a better post-world. He didn't want heavy punishment and reparations. The British and the French ignored him on this, instituted overly ridiculous. I never said he didn't want any restitution. He did not want the ridiculous amount of debt that the French and the British wanted on the Germans. They ignored him. They ignored the war guilt clause. That led to problems. How is the Treaty of Versailles not responsible for the next war? Because thanks to the Americans and not the British, the Germans were, and I'm sorry, I love the British. I'm not here to just talk about how great the Americans are, but my job is to be a historian. And the history is very settled on it. The British did jack you know what to help the Germans. It's the Americans who came up with Vidal's plan. It's the Americans who relieved the German suffering. The German economy was stable by 1929. When the American economy collapsed, then the German economy collapsed. Britain protected Germany from the French, not America. So, I mean, yes, I know what the Locarno Pact does. I also know it didn't do anything. So, and I would say without America, the British and the French wouldn't have won the war, but you don't agree with that because you don't agree with me, and you're allowed not to agree with me. My mods don't have to agree with everything I say, but my mods don't get to go rogue and try to run the channel. Britain couldn't implement waiving the reparations payment because the U.S., not because of its own hatred for Germany. Okay? The Americans are the ones who got the money and gave it to the Germans. I don't see the British doing any of that. I see the British and Lloyd George demanding heavy war indemnity. And I'm sorry, I know the British have to do everything right, but nope, they didn't do it right this time. And it's not because I believe that the Nazis come about because of the war debt thing. I believe that it was a bad idea. I believe the war guilt clause was a bad idea. Churchill did starve. Millions of Indians even starved because of the Bengal famine. Nobody is going rogue and is trying to run your channel. You're just framing us and insulting us and lying about us. That's ad hominem. Losers do that. Well, I'm just going to let YouTube judge. I'm going to let the people out there judge. Because it's absolute nonsense that I cannot rely on my moderators to not insult me, run me down, accuse me of lying and being disingenuous, and bringing up stuff that doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. I'm sorry, Hearts, you're going to lose that debate. I've already said that you're going to lose that debate. I don't care about it. I'm more than willing to have any sort of debate, but isn't this my channel? Isn't a moderator supposed to help me run my channel rather than fight me about it all the time? I haven't lied. I haven't been disingenuous. I've been consistent about this. And then when I change my mind, I get called out for changing my mind about certain things, and it's, oh, you're disingenuous. No. I handled Ascension like a Soviet. My moderators are allowed to dissent with me. They're allowed to disagree with me. I have no problem with them disagreeing with me. They have their own opinions. That's wonderful. Not at the cost of the product of my channel. When my moderator is insulting me, that looks bad to new people. How does this not get through his skull? Or anyone's skull, for that matter? We are talking about history. That has nothing to do with your channel. Throw up the paper. Where's the paper? There. Throw up the paper. That's just absurdity. Yes, because my channel isn't called the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Schedule a debate then. If you lose, you got to put Wilson F tier. I'm not going to put Wilson F tier. I'm sorry. You make your own tier video. You get your own 11,000 subscribers. And then you can make anything you want. Jeez. For goodness sakes. On the one hand, it's Britain is so great, and if you ever criticize Britain, I'm just going to criticize America, even though I criticize America all the time. And it's jingoistic nonsense over and over and over again. And then on the other side, it's, you have to agree with me now, don't you? No, I don't agree with you anymore. Oh, how dare you, you disingenuous jackass. Oh, my God. I just don't even know. Simon never did this. And Simon disagreed with me all the time. People disagree with me all the time. And they're allowed to disagree with me. And they're allowed to bring up points. They're just not, but you just can't take no for an answer. When your favorite pub is closed, do you throw a rock through the window and go in and pour yourself a brewski? Because most democratic societies didn't let women vote early on. I'm done. We were doing great. It looked peaceable. There was no Israel stuff today, thank God, because I had enough of that yesterday. Yeah. Say that you change your mind. You never proclaim that you are changing your mind. You act as if that has always been your view. That's just, I know I don't. How many times do I say on the live streams and on videos, I was wrong about this. This isn't what I think anymore. I call Paul Revere a blacksmith. Oops. I've made plenty of mistakes. I'm just not going to dwell on them constantly. I have told people on this stream, I had this view. This view is incorrect. Now I have this view. I think it's correct. My job is to tell the truth. So, of course, I'm not going to lie to you. I never heard that because I haven't changed my mind about a lot of it. In fact, I have admitted that I changed my mind. I said just 5 minutes ago that if we did the tier ranking video again, I would move Wilson down to C tier. He's at B tier right now. I'm not changing my mind on James Polk. You haven't convinced me of James Polk. And the War of 1811 happened in 1812. Israel was promised this chat about 3,000 years ago. It might as well be. Greg, come back any live stream. Usually it's a Saturday for some reason, maybe because it's Shabbat. But we've got people just obsessed with Jews. If it's not Israel, it's not Trump. If it's not Trump, it's our history debate. Why can't it just be Q&A? Why can't it just be friendly history? I don't like doing the dark history side. I really, really don't. But I'm just so fed up with this. What do you want? You want me to change my mind? I'm sorry. Something called studying this for 20 years makes it kind of hard to do that. You present good evidence, I change my mind. I'm able to give credit to a president who does certain things correctly. I'm sorry. If the U.S. had joined the League of Nations, I don't know that the Nazis come up. I said I'm not going to give Wilson overwhelming credit. FDR does a much better job in the last World War than Wilson does in World War II. I would love for there to be 3,000. We had 100 people just watching me argue about Israel yesterday. Shuriken. It was crazy. But could it be because your good evidence isn't as good as you think it is and you're suffering from confirmation bias? I read this one source and it proves Woodrow Wilson was terrible. Well, yeah, you know what? I'm not very sympathetic to Wilson, but if you look at the historical community, which I'm a part of, Wilson is bathed in Gatorade. Oh, this forward-thinking man! If only they had listened to Woodrow Wilson. That's not fully true. But I'm not going to say that, yeah, they should have never listened to him. It is Pius. It's Pius is it 7th or 8th? I think it's 7th, with Napoleon, in house arrest. I love this painting. Okay, you don't call me disingenuous or a liar. No, you just decide to, every time I say the British did something bad, it's, well, you Americans live in this terrible place and you have a fascist president. I'm sick of it. I'm going to tell you a big secret, Harry, about Americans that I know who support Trump. They're sick of him too. And you know who's even more sick of him than them and you? Me. You know a lot about history. What do you think of Orange Man? Orange Man, Orange Man, Orange Man, Orange Man, Orange Man, the Oompa Loompa, the Cheeto. I don't care. In 3 years, he won't be president anymore. Is the world going to end? I just don't get it anymore. Jacques David. Is it Jacques Louis David who did this? I'm not the TDS channel. I'm not. I don't have TDS. I have normal people syndrome. NPS, normal people syndrome. I look at somebody, I look at them from a particular lens that I'm comfortable with, and I say, this is good, this is bad. That's my own personal perspective. It has nothing to do with the person. And I'm only going to talk about Donald Trump on this channel from a historical perspective. Even when I do present good evidence, Yes, what have I not given a chance? I like this evidence presented. You present it, and then I disagree with you, and then you're like, no, you're just being stubborn. No, I don't agree with it. I don't think it's true. Yeah. Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. What were you saying about Jacques-Louis David, Martin? The Irish Jacques David did a great portrait of Pius VII when he was, oh yes, imprisoned by Napoleon. I'll have to look that up. Isn't he the one who did the crowning with Josephine and Napoleon and Pope Pius? Anyways, I don't know. Please like and subscribe. Thank you I hope you enjoyed the show at the end. Usually you have to go to OF for stuff like that, but I hope everybody has a really great week. I'm going to wrap it up. Please become a member, super chat. That always helps the channel. No pressure, though. We will be back Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern for our usual Q&A. You got an hour of Q&A and an hour of a live stream lecture. Next week, live stream lecture will be at 4 p.m. Eastern. It'll be on Andrew Jackson, but we got back-to-back Q&As before the Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm sure we will do a debate at some point when I'm actually not crazy busy in my own life, because, I have my own life on top of this and, trying to handle history stuff. So thank you, everybody. Martin, thank you for joining us. Take care. Have a great week. And as always, love history. Bye-bye.